A hostel is a form of low-cost, short-term lodging, where guests share a multi-bed dormitory with a number of other people. Often the beds are in the form of bunk beds, and the rooms are meant to fit as many people as possible so as to create for a cheaper alternative to hotels and Airbnbs. These rooms can be single or mixed gender, and they can have private or shared bathrooms. Hostels are a common go-to for solo travelers who aren't looking to spend a lot of money on a hotel, or for people who only really plan on using the place to sleep and not really hang out. The 3 stories you're about to hear were recounted by solo travelers who stayed in hostels and had not so great experiences with the people they were sharing their rooms with. I was for a while talking to this French girl that I matched on some dating app after my breakup. We were texting for a while, then started calling and FaceTiming each other almost every night. We connected really well, but she came from a strict family who she still lived with. So when the idea of me visiting her came up, she made it clear she wouldn't be able to host me, and when I asked if she'd want to share a hotel room together, she said not the first couple nights after we met just because her parents would have a freak out. So since I was only 23 and my pockets weren't stuffed, I booked a stay at a hostel not far from her in Paris. I downloaded a couple movies to watch on the 7-hour flight since I already knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I never can on flights. And I was right. I tried sleeping but didn't even get close. So by the time I landed and then Ubered to the hostel, I was running on 0 hours of sleep within the past 24 hours. I was exhausted. Due to the 6-hour time difference, it was also like 3 in the morning, so at least that meant I could just go crash in the bed in the hostel and I wouldn't be jet lagged the next day. I arrived to the hostel, which admittedly wasn't the nicest place ever. It was small. There was a certain odor to the lobby, and the front desk worker wasn't too enthusiastic about his job. But it was 3 a.m. after all, so I had to cut him some slack. I walked to the room I'd be staying in, and there were 6 beds, 5 of them empty, but one had a guy sitting on it. He was on his laptop, typing away at something. He looked up at me, then back down at his laptop. I said hey, but he didn't respond back. He seemed invested in what he was doing, so I just laid down in one of the empty beds. But the light to the room was still on. I asked him if it was okay that I shut off the light. Then he looked at me with a blank expression but didn't say anything. I repeated what I said, assuming he didn't hear me, and he nodded his head with this weird smile. So I got up and turned off the lights to the room. I passed out pretty quickly due to my lack of sleep, but surprisingly, I woke up a couple hours later. The room was still dark, but I didn't know for sure what woke me up. I rolled over to my side and looked around the room. It was almost pitch black, but I could see that all the beds were empty. All of them. Where was the other guy that was there earlier? The 2 bunk beds next to me were empty, top and bottom, but I knew something had to have woken me up. I looked on my phone, and it was 5 in the morning. I needed sleep, so I said screw it. He probably left, and maybe a sound from out in the hall woke me up. I lay back down on my side and closed my eyes. The mild traffic noises from outside was all that I heard. Then the bed shook a bit, and I heard a little crack of the metal frame, accompanied with this freakish breathing sound. I looked up in horror, and on top of me, I saw a head peering over the edge of the top bunk, looking into the bottom bunk at me. I can see the same creepy smile on his face, and his medium to longish black hair was drooping down with gravity below the top of his head as he hung upside down. It was a horrifying sight that words really can't explain. I screamed and fell off the bed as I realized what I was looking at. He sat up in the top bunk and continued looking at me. I screamed, "What the F are you doing?" as I threw something at him. He started to laugh, this really strange, off-putting laugh. I immediately turned the light on and went through my stuff to make sure nothing was stolen, while watching him at the same time. I then heard a click of a phone camera and looked at him as he was holding his phone up to me, clearly having just taken a picture of me. He was still laughing while looking at me. Something was wrong with this man. I didn't know if he had some screws loose mentally, or if he was doing this with bad intentions. I zipped up my bag and went to the front desk and requested a different room immediately, one of the single private rooms. After explaining why and trying to get a reduced rate, he wouldn't budge, but he said he'd check on the room with the guest that I was just in. I didn't call the police because I didn't know if any laws were broken, but I sure as hell left a review of the hostel. The rest of my trip there was good. I had a good time with the girl I was seeing, but every time I returned to the hostel, I was scared I'd run into that guy. I don't like how a picture of me is on that weirdo's phone. I'm not a physical guy, but I wish in that instance I did get physical. I'm a solo traveler. I've stayed in countless hostels as a means of saving money, while also meeting new interesting people. I've stayed in a total of about 20 hostels in my life, and 90% of the time I've had good experiences. My first truly awful experience, though, was at a place called Freedom Traveler Hostel. And before I begin, I want to note that my horrible experience wasn't the complete fault of the hostel itself. The Freedom Traveler Hostel is located in Rome. It was my first time ever visiting Rome. I was completely inexperienced to the landscape and relied heavily on Google Maps and locals. In fact, even finding the hostel itself proved challenging as there were no signs for the place outside. But once I found the place, I let myself in through the big brown doors and was greeted by a nice woman working the front counter. I had already booked a stay in one of the 4-person rooms. I was led to the room I'd be staying in, which had 1 bunk bed and 2 single beds, totaling sleeping space for 4 people. The room had a green theme to it, but it wasn't the biggest room. The worker told me there weren't many people staying in the hostel at the moment, which I didn't really have a problem with if it would mean I would have more privacy in the room. The woman had a smile on her face the entire time, and I appreciated her help. She showed me where I could store my luggage, which was actually just some shed in the back garden area. I wasn't impressed nor confident with it, so I decided I'd leave my luggage in the room, especially since I didn't bring anything too valuable. I was exhausted after a whole day of traveling, so after changing clothes and stowing my luggage under the bottom bunk bed, I laid down ready to take a quick power nap. Not long after, I heard a knock at the door, and 2 young men walked in. They had thick Italian accents, I could tell right away. They greeted me and started talking to me, even though I was mid-nap, but I'm polite and social, so I was friendly and chatted with them. They introduced themselves as Marco and Lucio, brothers. Marco had to be like 6'4", he was huge. Lucio was probably 5'11", but he wasn't a toothpick either, and I could see the resemblance in their faces. They were very tan, but both had receding hairlines, even though I could tell they were in their early 20s. They weren't the friendliest looking guys, but at first they seemed okay enough. After getting acquainted in English with them, the 2 brothers started to talk amongst themselves in Italian. They didn't know that I understood though, because right away I understood them to be talking about me and laughing at me. I heard, I believe, Marco describing me as some silly white boy. I could have said something right there in Italian, but instead I wanted to keep the illusion that I didn't speak the language. The 2 brothers eventually got up from their beds and left the room, with Lucio smiling and waving at me as they left. I just realized they didn't have their luggage in the room, which led me to believe they left their luggage in the storage shed in the garden area. I went to the garden area for a bit just to mingle with some of the people sitting out there, and I met a few nice tourists who were also staying there for the weekend. Then off I went to explore the city, heading in the direction of city center. After many hours and 2 food stops later, I returned to the hostel expecting some people to be socializing in the lounge area or in the back garden, but there was no one. So I figured I'd just get some early shut-eye. It was 9 p.m. anyway. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I remember waking up. The lights in the room were still off, but I heard whispering voices. The brothers were back. I didn't move. I listened to what they were saying, still speaking in Italian. One of them whispered something that roughly translated to, "Just grab it, or are you gonna do it?" I didn't know what it meant, but I had a feeling they were talking about my luggage. I was waiting to hear the sound of my luggage being moved before I would let them know I was awake, but instead, I felt a sweet-smelling, cold and wet cloth being pressed up to my face, and I reacted by yelling and swatting it off my face. I turned to see one of the brothers standing over me, and I screamed, "What are you doing?" The man over me, I couldn't tell which one it was, then got on the lower bed with me and tried to subdue me, but I kicked him off and screamed for help. The other brother pulled him away from me, and the 2 men took off out of the room. I quickly grabbed my bag and shoes and went to the front desk for help. The man who was working now said he saw the 2 guys leave, but there was no information on them even staying there. They were 2 random locals who were trying to rob visitors to the hostel. They tried to literally chloroform me. I didn't stay there after that, of course. I'm sure they've upped their security now, but when I stayed there, clearly anybody could have just walked right in. If I wasn't awake, I would have been chloroformed and robbed of my entire bag. After this, I started being more careful of the hostels I stay at. I once went to Miami Beach by myself for the Art Basel, and to just escape the cold. My friend Mia would be there with her boyfriend, and I'd meet up with them, but I wasn't staying with them. Hotels and Airbnbs in Miami aren't cheap though, especially if you're flying solo, so I went with this hostel called Bikini Hostel. It's like in the heart of Miami Beach, and it was pretty crowded. Even the check-in lobby had some people in it. It had a younger vibe, mostly people in their 20s. Some people seemed to be there in groups, others solo like me. I didn't spend too much time in the hostel though. It was only meant as a place to sleep for me. The place had lockers that you could put your bags in, so I was able to be gone the entire day with peace of mind. It wasn't until that first night that I returned and met some of the people in the room with me. I was in a mixed dorm, meaning both male and females, though I was actually the only female in the room. I wasn't necessarily uncomfortable with that. I wasn't really there for the people, more so just the money saved. I met about 3 of the however many people were actually staying in the room. The next morning, I woke up, and first thing I did was look for my phone, which I thought I left on the bed. I looked all over the bed and then under it. Someone in the room had to have taken it. I started asking everybody if anybody had it. I asked the guy in the bed next to me to call my number and see if we could hear it ring, but no one could. I started to question if maybe I didn't bring it back to the room after all. I borrowed the same guy's phone to call my friend Mia and tell her I lost my phone and to meet me at the brunch place we wanted to hit. I checked the entire room one last time, then checked with the front desk and asked them to call Mia's number if anyone should turn my phone in. Then I left to meet Mia at this place on Collins Avenue to get brunch with her and her boyfriend. While there, I used Mia's phone to sign into iCloud to check Find My iPhone. It said the last known location was at the hostel 2 hours ago. That gave me some form of relief, because maybe I left it in my bag or the locker or something. We went back to the hostel together and looked everywhere in the room, including the locker and my bag. It didn't turn up, and this made absolutely no sense, but I wasn't going to let it ruin my trip. We walked to the convention center, which was where the Art Basel was being held. After leaving hours later, we grabbed a late lunch or early dinner and hit a couple bars afterwards. At some point, I checked Find My iPhone on Mia's phone again, and this time it said my phone had moved. It was basically right on top of us. Mia and her boyfriend joked about me being sure I don't have it on me. I told them I absolutely do not. I looked around for anyone who might have my phone, but what would I even look for? I put my phone into lost mode now that I knew someone had it. Mia's boyfriend screamed out, "Did anybody find a lost phone?" But no one came forward, though everyone looked at us and some people laughed, that's for sure. We tried calling my phone a bunch of times, and though it would ring, no one picked up. I went back to the hostel when it was dark out to change clothes. As I was walking back, I was starting to accept that maybe my phone wasn't going to be returned to me, but my entire walk back, I felt like this weird-looking guy was following me. He took every single same turn I took. I don't think he noticed that I noticed, but I was very suspicious he was following me. When I got back to the room, I went on my laptop before getting changed to check Find My iPhone again, and now the location was back in the hostel. I was excited because I thought maybe they were returning it. I checked the front desk though, and nothing. I asked a bunch of people in the hostel too. No one had it, or at least they weren't admitting to it. So I went to Instagram on my laptop and started DMing Mia to keep her updated on when I'd be ready to meet them out. I went to take a quick shower, then changed into more going out appropriate attire. When I came out from the bathroom and back into the room, I was shocked to see that man that I thought was following me was sitting in one of the beds on his phone. There were 2 other guys in the room with us at that moment, but I had a scary thought, so I hurried to DM Mia to call my phone right now. She said okay, and then I heard the sound of a phone vibrating in a pocket or on a bed. I looked up at the guy, who suspiciously looked back at me at the same time as if he knew, and that told me everything. I started yelling, "Give me my phone," exclaiming, "I got you," to him. The other 2 guys in the room helped me, and demanded the guy empty his pockets and give me my phone. He listened, and took out a phone, sure enough my phone. I snatched it from his hand and told the other 2 guys that he had been following me all day and was purposely avoiding returning my phone, which he probably took while I was asleep. The guy got up and hurried out of the building with his backpack, never returning. I made friends with the 2 guys who helped me. Their names were Mark and Paulo. I had them come out with me to meet up with Mia. I'm grateful they were there, because I wonder how things would have played out differently if they weren't. I also recommend keeping your phone and valuables in a very safe place if you ever stay in a hostel, and just generally be aware of the people around you. My window on my side of the bed, and it was much clearer. There was some song that sounded like it was from the 1940s or something blasting. I later found out after looking up the lyrics that the song name was Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf by Henry Hall. It has a slight eerie vibe to it for some reason, even though it was meant to be a happy song. But at the time of listening to it coming from our backyard, it was nothing but downright horrifying. We were still learning the house, but we figured there must be a backyard light switch downstairs. I ran downstairs to the back door and flicked the light switches next to the door, and one of them turned on the backyard lights. I didn't see anyone in the backyard. I opened the door, and the music was louder, obviously, but as I walked out into the grass, I realized it wasn't coming from the backyard, rather from the woods. The song played to completion as I was outside in the yard just standing there looking around. When the song ended, there was silence again. It seemed like someone must have been playing some stupid housewarming prank, but it wasn't appreciated. I went back to my wife and told her it was probably just some kids trying to scare the new ones in town for whatever reason. Hearing myself even say that, I realized how stupid and weird it sounded. Why would anyone do that? The next night, it happened again. A few minutes after we turned out the lights in the bedroom, music from outside started blasting. This time much louder, and the song playing was that song everyone's heard, Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Cheryl and I once again looked at each other, this time in genuine disgust and worry, because we had hoped it was just going to be a one-time thing, but it was happening again. I looked out the window, and this time I could see something on the grass. It wasn't a person, but there was definitely something out there. I told my wife I was going to check it out. She said we should just call the cops, and I said yeah, we will in a second. I went out there with this mindset that I need to establish I'm the man of the house, not just to my wife, but to whoever was thinking they could mess with us just for being the new people on the block. When I was in the yard, I saw the object in the grass was smaller than I had thought, but the blaring, creepy song was coming from it. I realized it was an old radio. I turned it off and looked up at the window at my wife who was watching, and I held it up, yelling that someone left it there to scare us with the music. What she did next was not something I expected in response to that. She started screaming my name to run inside. She kept screaming, "Run." I yelled, "Why?" And she screamed back, "There's people standing behind you." This statement made my heart skip a beat, and I turned around to face the woods. I saw 3 figures standing like 6 feet apart from each other, clearly facing my direction. They weren't running at me, they were just standing there. I yelled, "Oh shit," and ran back inside the house, slamming the door behind me. My wife was upstairs, hysterical, crying already. I told her I'd call the cops, and I did. They arrived thankfully not that long after. All the while, we were scared to hear knocks at one of the doors or windows. My wife and I desperately explained the situation to both of the police that arrived, and I showed them the radio on the ground. I asked them if they could take it back with them as evidence for prints, and told them I only touched the top part with the handle. They did take the radio. They also checked the front of the woods with their flashlights for a few minutes, probably just as a deterrent to the people in the woods to stop their behavior if they were still there. When the police left, honestly, we went right back to feeling vulnerable and scared, but thank Christ the people never returned. This was only a few weeks ago though. God forbid they came back, I'd try to get it on video. After going from living with my parents for 28 years to buying my first house, I'll admit it was a bit of a shock to adjust to. This was July of 2022, so very recently that I moved in. My house is a 30-minute drive from my parents' house, so we're not that far away. In my parents' house, I would always constantly be awoken at night by my dad going up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. He's basically a chronic insomniac, and constantly has to get water or go to the bathroom throughout the night. So having my own place would finally mean peace and quiet. But that doesn't mean my dad didn't pass down his inferior sleeping abilities to me, because I'm a very light sleeper too. The layout of my new house is as follows: a small unfinished basement with laundry and boiler room, first floor with living room, kitchen, bathroom, and dining room, and the upstairs with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. One bedroom I use as an office, another one I use as a little workout room. For the first couple of days, my dad was over to help me bring in furniture and set the place up. The bulk of it was done after that. Then it was just minor decorating and smaller things here and there. I'd say a week into moving in, I was practically done with the furnishings and fully at home. On a Sunday night, I could tell I was going to have a rough time trying to sleep because I was wide awake. I took a melatonin and a sleeping pill to help, and within an hour, I was out like a baby. Usually when I take these, I sleep through the night without waking up. This night, though, I woke up. A sound from outside my room woke me up. I was so dazed and confused, freshly woken up from an intense dream, that I wasn't thinking clearly. The noises from outside my room were familiar footsteps going up the stairs. My dad, as usual, waking me up with his middle-of-the-night trips up and down stairs. I tried to drown out the noise and ignore it. I was in such a daze that it didn't even hit me right away that those footsteps couldn't be my dad's. I snapped back to reality and sat up, listening. The footsteps stopped. Now that I was fully awake, I wondered if it was an auditory hallucination. Like, was it just something engraved in my memory that I heard it in my half-woken up state? I actually nervously called out, "Dad?" I didn't know what I was expecting to happen, but no one called back. I went out into the hallway outside of my room and turned on the lights to each room I passed. I made it to the stairway, and I looked down the stairs at a tall man in a mask at the bottom, looking up at me. It didn't feel like a reality that I was actually staring at an intruder in my house. I didn't see any weapons on him, but I wasn't about to go fight him. I screamed at him to get the fuck out of my house, definitely with a shake in my voice. Believe it or not, he turned around and left through the front door. I ran down the stairs to lock it behind him. When I went to call my dad, I heard the back door to my house slam shut. There was a second person in the house who I didn't see. I was full on freaking out. My dad picked up, of course, because he's never asleep, and he questioned why I was calling him and not the damn police. He told me to hurry, so I called the police, and the operator asked me a million questions while I waited. I was interviewed by the arriving officers, who asked me for a description of the robber, what they stole, if anything, and which direction they left in, and what vehicle. Unfortunately, I didn't think to watch them leave, so I couldn't even answer what direction they went. And I couldn't give a physical description other than one of them was tall because of the mask. It didn't actually seem like they stole anything, but I didn't have anything of real value on display on the first floor. The method of entry was a kitchen window, just big enough to climb through. Experiencing a home invasion is something you always hear about on the news, but never assume it would actually happen to you, much less right after you move into your first house. I wish I could have been more help to the police in identifying them. Now, I sleep with a knife next to my bed. When I bought my current house that I'm living in, right away my next door neighbors knocked on the door and introduced themselves. They were both as kind as could be on both sides. My house is waterfront on a canal. I wanted a waterfront house because I have a boat, so it was a no-brainer to have the convenience of keeping my boat in the water in my backyard. A house on a canal, though, means sacrificing privacy in the backyard, as the house across the canal from me looks right into my yard. From the start, even when I went to view this house for the first time, I wasn't the biggest fan of the house across the canal. It just looks like it hasn't been taken the best care of, and it's kind of an eyesore when I'm sitting in the backyard. For almost 2 weeks after moving in, I'd look out my window before bed every night to the house across the canal to always see the lights out. The house was always pitch black. I wondered if maybe it was a second home for whoever owned it. But then one night, things changed. On the same day that my brother helped me launch my boat into the water and bring it to my dock in the yard, just as I was about to shut the blinds in my bedroom, I looked across the canal again, and tonight there was one light on in the house across the canal. And in that room, which looked to be a living room by the back door, there was a man standing there looking outside. So there was someone living there after all. The man was in sweatpants and a long-sleeve shirt. He looked like he had a full head of grayish hair. Based on appearance from that distance, he looked like he could be 50 on the dot. It seemed like he could have been looking at my windows. But then again, the more likely explanation was he was just looking out into the yard thinking, even though it was pitch black out there. I closed my windows and went about the rest of my night. The next day after work, I got home and set my stuff on the kitchen table, then went outside to the backyard to plant some grass seed in the yard. I couldn't help but look and notice the man standing at his back door again. This time I knew he was watching me. It was obvious. We made extended eye contact, then I looked away. I didn't want to wave, that would be weird. I tried to just pretend I didn't notice him still there looking at me. It's as if I was doing something wrong being in my own backyard. One day I had my friends over to take the boat out, and both when we were leaving and coming back, I didn't see the man at his door. I had only seen him twice so far, but already I was paranoid whenever I was outside, and always looked across the canal at his door. A few nights later, I looked out my window in my bedroom again. He was at his door again. I wondered how long he would just stand there. It was so bizarre. I turned off my lamp, and then kind of stood just beside the window peering my head out, to see if he'd keep standing there even after I would turn the light out. And he did. I must have stood watching for 3 minutes, and he wouldn't move. I shut my blinds and continued with my night. I told myself from here on out I'd just ignore it and keep my blinds shut past sunset. I went to bed, wondering how I would go about confronting the situation, or if I even would. I considered maybe just going out to the dock and waving, or trying to talk to him, or even going to knock on his door to introduce myself, but that sounded stressful. On this same night, while I was in bed, I was starting to drift off into sleep when I heard something in my backyard. There was someone on the deck, walking around. I could hear it. I went to the window to get a look, but I couldn't see from my upstairs window. I'd have to go downstairs if I wanted to see. But before that, there was a startlingly loud crash sound from below me. It was the window. I could tell it was the sound of shattering glass. I ran downstairs to the kitchen to grab a knife and the phone to call 911. I looked towards the back of the house and saw I was right. Glass of the backyard window was spilled out onto the floor, and one single brick laying on the wood floor, clearly what was thrown through the window. I was frightened that I'd see someone hiding in the corner of the room, but to my relief, there was not. I called 911 and requested police officers get here ASAP. Before the police arrived, I peeked out the now broken window into the yard. I turned on the back deck light. Whoever did this clearly already ran for it, but that was good, at least they didn't come into the house. When the police officers arrived at my house, I showed them the window and brick, and told them that it was most definitely the guy across the canal who'd been eyeballing me through his windows since I moved in. They asked if he had any reason to have any issue with me, and I said no chance in hell, I didn't even know the guy. I asked them to please go to his house and arrest him. They said they'd go over and knock on the door. So when another police car came to my house, the first 2 officers went to drive over to the house. And when they came back about 20 minutes later, they said nobody lived in that home. A neighbor told the police when he saw them outside that the house had been foreclosed on months ago and the old tenant was evicted a while ago. I know nothing about foreclosures, so I asked the cops if maybe it was someone from the bank that foreclosed on the house. They said their guess is as good as mine. They recommended I install some cameras outside of my house in case the harassment continued. The police left one of their cars parked in front of my house, I guess to make me feel safer with my window being busted open now. The next morning, I woke up early and went over to that house, and I tried opening the front door and then the back door. The front door was locked, but the back door was unlocked. I quietly opened the door and took 2 steps inside of the dark, creepily empty house, and I heard something from upstairs. I noped out of there and ran back to my house. The police car was still outside my house. That day, I had my window fixed and pretty soon installed doorbell cameras in the front and back of my house. I haven't seen that man in the house again. I still don't know if he's still in there, who he is, if he's the one who threw the brick through my window, or why. Knock on wood, things have been fine ever since. Growing up in the suburbs, one thing I always enjoyed in the summertime was the ice cream truck, specifically Mr. Softee. As a very little kid, anytime I'd hear the song of the Mr. Softee truck echoing through the streets, I'd beg my mom for a few dollars and run outside to wave down the truck. I remember one of the first times I was ever left home alone. I was, I think, 7 years old. My mom was away somewhere and my dad was off that day. He apparently entrusted me to be home alone for a few minutes while he ran to the store. He was definitely the less responsible parent. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob, I'm pretty sure, when I heard the familiar sound of the Mr. Softy tune outside. I rushed to the kitchen and climbed onto a chair to reach the little basket on the ledge that usually had stray dollars and coins inside. I grabbed a dollar bill and some coins. I couldn't tell you the exact amount, obviously. I ran outside to the street and waved the truck down just in time. It pulled over, and the oldish man came to the window asking what I wanted. When I asked for a specialty cone, he told me I was a little short with the money I had. I believe I told him I didn't have any more money because my parents weren't home. I distinctly remember him asking me, "You're home alone?" as if he were confirming it. I said yes, and he started acting all friendly and understanding. He told me to come into the truck so that I could make my own ice cream cone. I stepped into the truck, and the man went and shut the door. He told me to help myself to whatever ice cream I wanted. He said he was going to show me how to be an ice cream man, and he went to the driver's seat of the truck and started driving us somewhere. My young, innocent self thought this was all super exciting as I was pouring soft serve ice cream into a cone. But I finished that cone and then started wondering where we were going, as we had been driving for a while. I went to the front of the truck to ask him, and he asked me in a more stern voice than he'd been speaking in to please go stay in the back of the truck. I listened to him. My appetite for more ice cream was suddenly gone as I got more uncomfortable. We went from a busy main road to a quiet residential road. At some point, I noticed the ice cream truck's music wasn't playing, and he was driving rather fast. The truck finally stopped in front of some abandoned-looking building, and he asked me to come follow him outside to the building. But not before we heard a tapping on the door of the truck. I heard a familiar, concerned voice yelling through the crack of the door. The man opened the door, and my neighbor Margie walked into the truck. She saw me and came to grab me by the arm and pull me out of the truck. She told me to wait in her car while she ran back to yell at the man. I was extremely confused at first. The man in the ice cream truck sped off down the street. This was a time before cell phones. She couldn't just call 911 right away. She ran to the nearest house. At first I was confused, but obviously I know now she was asking for the owner's phone. She called 911, and I'm sure she reported the suspicious ice cream truck and attempted kidnapping. I don't remember the rest, except telling Margie my story, her driving me home to be greeted by my dad and cop cars, and then being told to go inside after telling a couple police officers what happened. The exact ice cream truck was found. I'm not sure how they did it. Maybe by investigating street camera footage and getting the plate number. I was made to confirm the driver was in fact the man who took me into the truck. He was sentenced to prison. That's all my parents told me. I don't think they know his name. Either that or they didn't want to give it to me. Definitely not a memory I like thinking back on. Up until I was 28, I used to live with my parents in Camden, Maine, a rural boat town. They were hardly ever home because of work and just traveling a lot, so I'd hold down the fort a lot. My parents' property is large and private, so when they weren't home I'd often throw little parties. This was one of those nights. I had maybe 15 to 20 people over and we all hung out in the backyard. It started around 6 p.m. and people started leaving around 11 p.m. By midnight everyone was gone, and I was absolutely shot from a mixture of having been in the sun most of the day and then drinking since around 6. I changed and got into bed. Before I could even fall asleep though, I heard something one would not expect to hear this late at night. It was the sound of an ice cream truck, only it was a tune I'd never heard before, a kind of creepy sounding one. The tune got louder until it seemed to be right outside. I lay there waiting a minute or two for it to go away, but when it didn't, I finally got up and went to the window to look outside. I couldn't see anything from my bedroom window, so I went downstairs and looked out the living room window. I could vaguely see what had to be an ice cream truck out on the lawn. My heart started pounding the inside of my chest. Who was it? Why were they here? What did they want? I paced around the living room for a bit, not knowing whether to call the police or my dad, or just simply wait for them to leave. The awful tune of the ice cream truck didn't stop though, it grew sickening. I ended up finally snapping and going out the front door to the porch. There, I could more clearly see the ice cream truck parked on our property, like a little less than 100 feet away from the porch. It was parked on the grass, and it wasn't exactly a typical looking ice cream truck. It was like a white van with ice cream pictures stamped or painted on. I was a mix of confused and worried, mostly worried. Saying it was an abnormal sight would be a gross understatement. I stepped onto the grass with my bare feet and walked just a little closer to the van. The headlights weren't on, so when I got close enough, I saw there was no one in the driver's seat. When I got even closer, I saw one of the sliding doors on the side was open. I suddenly felt as though I could be jumped at any second. I looked around me in a panic, and then ran back inside the house and locked the door. Now I did call 911, and I asked them to please hurry. The woman asked me to walk around the house and check to make sure everything was locked. I started from the main floor and worked down to the den to the back door, and the glass panel on the back door was shattered. It was unlocked and opened. I whispered this to the 911 operator, even though I was truly freaking out inside. She told me to go to a room with a lockable door and wait there until officers arrived. So I tiptoed to the nearest bathroom and locked the door. The operator told me to stay on the line and be quiet. A few moments later, someone on the other side of the door tried turning the doorknob. Then they banged on the door 3 times. The woman on the phone said quietly that she heard it and for me to remain quiet and calm. Then I heard the back door to the house slam shut, and half a minute later, the tune of the ice cream truck slowly faded away as the van was driven off. I told the woman, but she said to wait until officers arrived. They took a disgustingly long time to arrive. I was waiting in that bathroom for another 5 minutes. If they arrived in a timely manner, they could have caught whoever was at my parents' house. Instead, all that happened was I got a police report. My personal theory is the ice cream truck tune was supposed to be a distraction or something, while one of the people in it broke into the house, as I'm sure there were more than one person in that van. I'm happy this happened to me when I was 23 and not, say, 10 years old, because that would have traumatized me. This happened a long time ago. I was in the 6th grade. People used to call me Jimmy until around high school. There was this ice cream truck that would always drive down my block once a day in the warmer months. The driver got to know me on a more personal level. He knew my name and I knew his, Bernard. I'd go outside for ice cream so often that he'd slow down or sometimes even stop for a minute in front of my house waiting for me to come outside, knowing I was a frequent customer. Anytime I'd buy ice cream from his truck, I'd always get the same Oreo ice cream cup. He'd always stop and talk to me for a few minutes, and sometimes he'd give me free ice cream. There was this one Friday, though, and I remember it was a Friday because it was the start of the weekend that my parents were going away. On this Friday, Bernard once again passed my house, and it was one of the days that I went outside to buy from him. On this day, though, he gave it to me for free again, and because of that, I stuck around and chatted with him for a while. He asked me how things were going and whatnot, and I told him I was excited to have the house to myself for the weekend. He was surprised that I would have the house to myself at such a young age. He said I was lucky and to enjoy. Then he drove off, and the truck eventually disappeared along with the music. The rest of the story is the part that you may not even believe. I stayed up late in my room because my parents weren't home. I was playing video games on my computer when I heard the sound of Bernard's ice cream truck. It didn't start from the distance and slowly get louder. No, it literally seemed to turn on right outside my house. I went to my window and saw the truck right outside, playing the music at this late hour in the night, past midnight. It had to be Bernard, but what was he doing? The music suddenly stopped, and the truck's lights turned off. I opened my window a crack just to listen for what might be going on. Just the sound of crickets, until I saw Bernard appear from the darkness, quickly approaching my window, yelling, "Jimmy." He stopped when his face basically banged into my window, and he started telling me to come outside. He told me I could get all the free ice cream I wanted, but the way he was speaking, he seemed off. He seemed like he was on something. His movements were spastic and sporadic. He then tried pulling my window further open aggressively, and I screamed and yanked it closed. He started knocking on the window, and I screamed and begged him to leave or I'm calling the cops. When I said that, he turned around and ran back to his truck. The lights turned back on and he drove off into the night without the music playing. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call my parents, and I was scared to call the cops. I just locked my bedroom door and tried to go to sleep, but it was a long night before I fell asleep. Bernard never returned to my block after that, but anytime I'd hear an ice cream truck passing by, I'd get paranoid it was him. Back when I was 17, my friend told me about this deep web drug website called Dream Market. It was where he bought things like weed and Adderall. He had what he referred to as a trusted dealer, whose information he sent me to buy from. I don't condone doing anything like this. I was simply just young and stupid. I thought buying Adderall would help me with my senior projects. Anyway, I went about doing that. However, this purchase made me intrigued to continue browsing Dream Market and seeing what else one could buy. And I saw this range from counterfeit bills to real guns. This got me more intrigued to view more of the deep web. I found some link somewhere on Dream Market that led to, I guess, what was a drug chat room, because it was just a lot of people seemingly advertising the drugs they were selling and their rates. I found it interesting. Some people would post random .onion links, and I clicked on one. It brought me to a black page with the title Home Base at top in large text. Underneath were a bunch of other random links. I clicked on a bunch of them. Most never loaded, probably being dead links. A couple loaded. One was another chat room. This one didn't have a title. There were like 3 usernames signed into the room, all random looking, just like the assortment of random letters I inputted just because I didn't care. The chat's previous history showed. A few people were talking in another language, then another guy was typing in English. That guy was still in the chat room, and actually, before I typed anything, he typed yo directed at me. I typed yo back. He said, "What you looking for?" I typed back, "I don't know, LOL." He asked how I found that link, and I told him just from some site called Home Base. I asked if he had any cool links, as it was my first time on the deep web. He types back, LOL, then sent a link. He didn't say anything else. I clicked the link, and it took a little while to load the page. It loaded the black background first, then a little text box near the bottom, and the last thing that loaded was a video. At first I thought it was like a pausable video, but it looked to be some kind of live streaming video. The video was black and white, and it was of a dark room with some mannequin-looking thing sitting in a wooden chair. There was this grainy effect to the footage that made it feel more surreal and unnerving. I genuinely couldn't tell if I was watching a live video or not. Then, as if it were some kind of movie jump scare, what I thought was a mannequin in that chair suddenly jumped up and sprinted towards the camera, and a loud, staticky screaming sound accompanied it. The apparent porcelain mask that the person was wearing was so close up on the camera at that point that all I could see was black. I went back to the chat and asked that guy what the hell this was. He replied, "Just keep watching, LOL," and then he left the chat. I went back to the other tab, and the video or live stream window was gone. It was now just a blank screen with a text box on the bottom. The text box didn't let me type anything though. My Tor browser window suddenly closed without my doing. Then a deep, raspy voice was coming from my speakers. It was someone obviously trying to disguise their voice. The voice said my first name and claimed they had all my files. Then the webcam window popped up and I saw my face on the screen. I turned off my laptop and went to the Geek Squad at Best Buy where I bought the computer. The guy I spoke to's guess was that he was able to somehow get the basic info off my computer, like my account name. He recommended I factory reset the computer. He helped me with the process. I didn't have anything I was worried about losing on there anyway. It was a relatively new computer. If you're ever on the deep web, I heavily recommend using some kind of VPN, even for the alleged safe websites. I'm 24 years old, and I'm from a small town called Yarmouth in Nova Scotia, Canada. I keep my social circle very small, Just my few friends and my coworkers, really. I mention that as a point in saying I don't really know anyone who would be out to get me in any way. I browse Reddit a lot in my free time. I'm an active poster. There was this one night when I pulled up Reddit on my browser out of boredom that I had a new message. Not unusual, as I'd have people messaging me in reference to my posts quite often. It was a message request from some random account, a now deleted username. The message said, check your email, your spam folder specifically. I replied back, huh? Why, who's this? In the meantime, I opened up my Gmail and went to the spam folder. There was one email that stuck out from the rest, titled in all caps, I know who you are. I opened the email and it was basically a paragraph full of my personal information, including my full name, my Reddit password, my home address, along with threats. Basically, whoever sent the email was asking for a one-time payment of $5,000 through Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address. My heart was basically in my throat. I had that terrible feeling of helplessness and like the entire world was collapsing in on me. The first thing I did was cover my webcam with a piece of tape. Secondly, I went back to Reddit to see if the user ever answered my message. They did not. I went to report the account on Reddit as quick as I could, as if that would even do anything though. I replied to the email, copy-pasting the exact message I sent to the Reddit account, asking who this was, how they got that information, and if this was a prank. I got an email back around 5 minutes later, in all capitals, saying, no, it's not a prank, we have all your information, including where you live, so your best course of action is to do as we say and you'll never hear from us again. Obviously, I was not going to shell out $5,000, I don't even make a lot of money to begin with. I contacted all of my friends asking if it was any of them, like begging them to just come forward now before I'd call the police. None of them admitted to it, so given that I threatened calling the police, I knew it wasn't any of them. I tried to think of anyone at work who might have issues with me, but really I get along with everyone at work. I chalked it up to my password somehow being stolen by malware or a hacker, and through that they somehow got the rest of my information. The main question was, do I pay the money? And that was absolutely not happening. I forced myself to go to sleep and left my laptop off the whole next day. I used my desktop instead after getting home from work. I didn't sign into Reddit or anything though. I did, however, change my password on all other websites and apps on my phone. I finally signed into my laptop late that night because I was just so bored and curious. Curious but nervous to see if anything had changed and if I'd gotten any new emails. I signed on and everything on my computer still looked normal. So I went to Reddit and saw the user who messaged me was now deleted. So I went to a subreddit which talked about computer hackers and scams and such, and I posted my experience. At some point, I noticed the taskbar at the bottom of the screen turned darker. Curious, I minimized all my windows, and my desktop wallpaper was different. I knew right away what it was though. I recognized the outside of my bedroom window. The white frame of the outside windowsill was in the picture, and the flash of the camera also caught me laying in my bed sleeping. Some seconds later, a pop-up window appeared, along with the Windows error sound. Inside the pop-up error window was a message saying the word pay, with a winking face following it. I closed my laptop screen and forced the computer off by holding the power button. I also pulled my blinds down and called my parents. It was still early enough to do so. I told my dad over the phone that some hacker had my info, and he came right over with his truck to help me load any valuables I could think of into his truck to stay with them for a while. Before we drove off from my apartment, my dad yelled like a madman into the night sky, basically threatening whoever was hacking me. It was definitely a scene, but I was too preoccupied with worry to be embarrassed by it. I stayed with my parents for weeks and used my mom's computer when needed. I blocked that email address that sent me the original email. I finally got back to my apartment a few days ago. I'm still scared every night to hear a knock at my window or get another threatening email. I haven't brought it to the police yet, as I'm hoping it's all just a bluff still to get me to pay. I'm also hoping it's over and that they've given up. My name is Miranda, I'm 25. I've had my share of experiences with stalkers and men harassing me. Social media has made that far too easy these days. I once got a suspicious email that I should have known better than to open. It was asking me to click a link to some random page because I was being sued by some random company. I clicked the link, and soon after that my computer started acting all glitchy and unresponsive. Even after restarting it multiple times, it was just laggy and slow, and random sound effects would play once in a while. I was certain my computer had a virus, but I wasn't sure to what extent it would go just yet. The next day, I had a bunch of friends texting me what's up with that Instagram post and asking if I was the one who even posted it. I panicked and opened Instagram, but I was logged out of my account. Someone was hacking me, this confirmed it. If they had my Instagram password, I had no idea what else they could have. Apparently the picture posted on my Instagram was some stupid cartoon meme. It was extremely embarrassing. Minutes of freaking out later, my Snapchat started blowing up. It was from some random account that just added me. They were spamming me to Snapchat call them, so I did. When they picked up, I saw like a quarter of someone's face. It looked like a young guy in his 20s. I could tell he was smiling, that was the creepy thing. The way he said hello was so long and stretched out. I was pretty frantic, asking what he wanted in return for my Instagram back. He started telling me some really creepy shit. He said he sees me every day and that he thinks I'm really pretty, and that this was the only way he'd get my attention. I didn't know what to say. He said he'd give me my account back if I would just be his digital girlfriend. As creepy and weird as this was, I said yes in a heartbeat just to get my stuff back. He told me the password to get back onto my Instagram account, and as soon as I changed the password, I set my profile to private and put a story up saying that wasn't me, I was hacked. I asked this guy for his name and what other info he had on me. He said I could just call him John, and that he could get all the information about me that he wanted. He said this with a smile too. I could see it in the fourth of his face that he would actually show. He refused to show the rest. I played nice the whole time, knowing this guy's a sicko. I managed to get him off the call by telling him I'd snap him tomorrow. I then told all my friends about it and asked what I should do. They all unanimously said I should activate 2-factor verification on my Instagram account and then deactivate the account and then block him. When I did all of that though, he didn't take it too well. An hour later, I got a new Snap user blowing up my Snap. I knew it was him, but I opened the snaps anyway. And it was him again threatening me, saying he knows where I live and blocking him was a stupid thing to do. I showed it to my parents now because it was getting serious, so my dad called the police. I didn't block the guy's Snapchat yet though, and I'm glad I didn't. As my parents and I were sitting in the kitchen waiting, I got a snap from the guy. It was a video. I waited a few seconds before opening it. It was a video of him sitting in his car in front of our house, with the caption, "Don't block me again." My dad ran outside in a fit of rage. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't. But the car wasn't even in front of the house anymore. The guy probably waited until driving away before sending that snap. I'm just gonna say the police did absolutely nothing. They seemed clueless on the matter. But there's not much police could do in hacker situations anyway, apparently. However, I did send a snap of the police car back to the guy, and put a caption, "Fuck with me again, you'll be arrested." He opened the snap and immediately blocked me, so I'd say it worked. This story has a happier ending than most, I guess. But the amount of info some people can get from you online is absolutely terrifying. I've worked as a nurse in multiple hospitals and facilities. Before the current hospital I work at, I worked at a geriatric hospital 30 minutes from my house. I had experience working with older patients before, so this was nothing new to me. I had been working at this hospital for only a couple of weeks, and you'll soon understand why. This was on my second to last shift at this hospital, unbeknownst to me at the start of that night. I was working the graveyard shift, and I was running on negative hours of sleep. I was assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients in this ward absolutely adored me. My presence as a young girl in her 20s among the residents of this ward who were otherwise left to themselves to float around in their minds, I'm sure saw me as a breath of fresh air, someone who could tie them to the now or to the everyday. If you're just left to yourself, you can mentally go to other places, but with someone else in your space, you're tied to that moment in time. I was dealing with a number of patients that night, but one was a little more restless than the others. Her name was Lena. This was my first night dealing with her, and she kept telling me anytime I'd enter her room about the voices she kept hearing and the man dressed in black she kept seeing in the corner of the room. The other lady in her room requested her curtain be closed before my shift started so that Lena would leave her alone. She was a sweet lady that smiled whenever I was around her, but she didn't say much and was very forgetful. Since I started my shift around 9 p.m., most of the patients were asleep by 11, but not Lena. Whenever she called me into the room, she'd be frightened of these alleged voices she was hearing, and the man in black that kept staring at her in the corner of the room. Not gonna lie, it was creeping me out a little. I believed that in her mind she was seeing and hearing these things, and I sympathized with her because I imagined them to be very scary. But still, I tried my best to calm her down and get her to go to sleep. I didn't want to turn on the TV to calm her down because I wanted to be courteous of the other patient in the room. I held Lena's hands and told her it's okay, to breathe and to relax. I reminded her that she wasn't here alone, and I was always just a call away. This seemed to do the trick. Lena relaxed for a while, and the next time I came in the room, she was asleep. Once most, if not all, of the patients are asleep, the night goes much slower. Time almost moves in reverse. An hour or two later, I was in the linen room stocking my cart when I heard something in the room. It was a relatively small, dead quiet room. I had the door closed too. That's why hearing another noise was weird. I turned, saw nothing, and resumed stocking my cart. Then I felt what I can only describe to be a hand on my shoulder. I looked at my shoulder, jumped, and screamed, but there was nothing on my shoulder. There was no one in the room. Yet I knew I felt something large basically grab my shoulder. I went out in the hall for a second to peek my head. No other nurses in sight. Dead quiet. I had nothing else to do but resume what I was doing. I continued stocking the cart until it was full. Then I turned to face the door, and I fell to the floor and started screaming as my heart was immediately in my throat. There was a man dressed in black standing outside the door, looking through the glass, smiling. My screams were loud enough to wake the entire ward. The man disappeared out of sight through the glass window of the door. Seconds later, the door opened and one of my fellow nurses came in to help me off the floor as I was hysterical. I asked her if she saw the man dressed in black. Her response was, "What man? There's no one else here." We checked all the rooms in the ward. There wasn't anybody dressed in black in there. My screams woke Lena from whatever light sleep she must have been in, and when I came into her room, she started talking of the voices. This time the screams, which she didn't know were my screams. I asked her what this man in black looked like, if he was smiling. And she looked at me, and I noticed her eyebrows point down, as her expression changed to look the most focused I'd seen her the entire day. She asked, "How did you know?" And even with my heart still racing, I felt it skip a beat as she said this. She started screaming now, screaming, "Get me out of here, he's coming." The other nurses came in and tried to calm her down. I was switched to a different ward that night with someone else, and I eventually ended up going home early because I was just so freaked out. I texted the head nurse the next day that my next shift would be my last, that the experience traumatized me and that I didn't really want to be in that building anymore. I got as friendly of a response as I could have hoped for. I've never been diagnosed with anything, nor have I ever dealt with hallucinations of any kind. I'm aware of the effects of lack of sleep, but this was next level. I don't know if my mind started playing tricks on me from what Lena was telling me all night, but the feeling of the hand on my shoulder, the image of the smiling man behind the glass door, matching the description a patient kept giving multiple times. This was one of those once-in-a-lifetime, unexplainable supernatural occurrences. At least, I hope it was once in a lifetime. Before the next story, I want to thank Guardio for sponsoring this video. Stories like the ones you hear on this channel are the reason why you need to be vigilant of your surroundings, but many people spend a majority of their time on the internet, so it's also important to be vigilant regarding your safety browsing the web. Guardio is an easy-to-use browser extension that, simply put, keeps you safe from scams and identity theft, so that you can do what you do online without worrying. By using Guardio, you'll protect your online browsing and information, avoid installing malware and falling victim to scams, and you'll get real-time alerts on any device when your information could be at risk. Everybody's encountered dangerous and annoying pop-ups while browsing the web. Guardio will immediately block any sites and providers that send you malvertising pop-ups so you can browse in peace. Being a YouTuber means hours of work online, so I wasn't too surprised when Guardio showed me all the existing threats on my system. Right now, Guardio is offering a special deal for my viewers. 20% off the monthly subscription if you use my link. So if you want a clean and secure browsing experience, go to guard.io/Mr. Nightmare, link in the description, and check out their affordable premium plan for full protection. 3 years ago, I contracted bacterial meningitis. I live in South Florida. I don't believe there was an outbreak going on or anything, so I'm not sure how I caught it or who I could have caught it from. I started developing really bad symptoms: painful headaches, confusion, sleepiness, nausea, and lack of appetite. But when the hallucinations started, that's when I knew I had something really serious. Laying sick in bed while my husband was at work, I heard a child's voice call Mom from downstairs. We don't have any kids. I dragged myself out of bed to look down the stairway to call my husband's name. Of course, he didn't answer because he was at work. The headache I had from standing was too much, so I went back to bed. For a second time, I heard a voice call from downstairs. It said hello.
Hello.
I picked up the phone and called my husband, freaking out to him into the phone that I was hearing a scary child's voice from inside the house, and that I thought I was hallucinating. He heard how distressed I was over the phone, and so he left work early to bring me to the hospital. While waiting for him to get home, I changed out of my pajamas, and while doing so, I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. As I was mid-throwing up, I heard another voice from outside of the bathroom. I couldn't hear what it might have said, nor could I tell if it sounded the same as the other voice I heard. I was losing my mind. I wasn't diagnosed until I arrived at the hospital, and apparently, if untreated, what I had could be very serious, even fatal. The doctor told me the hallucinations part was rather unusual, but not unheard of. I was given antibiotics through a needle shortly after I arrived at the hospital with my husband. The doctor told me that I was fortunate to have come to the hospital so quickly, as if I had waited much longer, this could have had lasting effects or possibly have been fatal. My husband stayed with me for a few hours in the room. I was told I was going to have to stay there for a few days to a week, given the severity of my symptoms. Around 10 o'clock, my husband left to go home, as he had work the next day. The nurse told me call her if I should have any issues. Though I still felt like absolute death, I nodded off pretty quickly. I started having this dream where my ex-husband was in the room, over my bed, looking down at me, talking. He was saying horrible things about my current husband. He patted my head and said he was glad I was okay, and that he came as soon as he saw my husband left. He went into this rant about how he despises my current husband and wants to kill him. He kept rubbing my forehead, then left the room. I often have bad dreams about my ex-husband because of how toxic and abusive our marriage was, and why it ended, which I'd rather not include. I woke up in this drowsy, lightheaded state and looked around the room. There was a chair pulled up in front of my hospital bed, but no one was sitting in it. It wasn't like that when my husband left. It was still the middle of the night, so I went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning to the nurse in the room. I told her about the weirdly vivid dream I had, and she laughed and told me that wasn't a dream, that my cousin came to visit me last night. I told her I don't have any cousins that live in this state. She looked more serious now and said, "Well, someone who said they're your cousin David visited you late last night." David was the name of my ex-husband. After explaining better, the nurse got a doctor, and the doctor told me the antibiotics may have caused delirium, which hindered my ability to recognize sleep from wakefulness, hence why I was so vividly hearing what David was saying. I called my husband to tell him what happened, and of course he was livid and concerned. He came back again that night after work. But that day, I texted David, asking what the hell he was thinking visiting me, and how did he know I was in the hospital. My text delivered, but he ignored it. I sent a follow-up, telling him I heard all of his threats towards my husband and that I'd be getting police involved. And minutes later, he responded saying, "I never made any threats towards your husband. I was simply there when I heard what happened to make sure you were okay. You must have heard things in your sleep." I responded, "Stay out of my life or I'll get police involved again." He didn't respond after this. I never told my husband about the threats I heard in my drowsy half-asleep state, because I didn't know if they were real or not. With a mix of the antibiotics and my already having weird audible hallucinations the day before, I don't think it's impossible that what I heard wasn't actually what was said. But I could be wrong. I left the hospital the next week. I once matched this girl that I'm still friends with on Tinder, named Francesca. She seemed cool right from the bat. She had a sleeve of tattoos on her left arm, red highlights in her hair, and she had in her profile that she loved to work out. One of her pictures was taken on the rooftop of this cool-looking building with a sick view. I asked her where it was, and she told me it was some abandoned hospital on the edge of town that's super cool to explore at night and super easy to get into. There's usually one cop patrolling the huge parking lot at night to deter trespassers, but she said it was super easy to circumvent. She came up with the idea of us going there together as our first date of sorts, if you want to use the word date. I was totally on board with it. She seemed cool, and it seemed like a cool, different kind of way to meet someone as opposed to the usual let's get drinks. I picked her up from her house 10 minutes away. Then we drove the 20 minutes to get to the hospital. Those 20 minutes gave us a nice chance to get to know each other a bit and get comfortable with each other's personalities for a little. When we got to the hospital, she told me to park on this dead-end street hidden by a bunch of tall bushes, which was a 5-minute walk to the inside of the hospital. We hopped this little barrier separating the road from the hospital parking lot, and then we jogged across the wide open lot towards the grass right next to the entrance she said she always used. She led us to this broken window to the basement of the hospital. It seemed kinda creepy, but I signed up for this. I was glad I wore raggy jeans like she told me to, because I knew I was gonna rip them on something. We used our phone flashlights. We didn't bring any special heavy-duty lights or anything. She seemed to know this whole hospital like the back of her hand. She led us to the stairway to the upstairs. I gotta say, being alone with one other person in a place like this at night was very scary, but I had no idea how scary it was about to get. On the first floor, Francesca kept talking so loud that I almost wanted to tell her to shh. I was paranoid we'd be found out because of her voice. Down the corridor we were in, it sounded like a door was opening or closing. Something echoed down the corridor to us. She heard it too and went silent. I asked her in a whisper, "Is it normal for others to be here?" And she said sometimes, but not really. We turned off our flashlights and waited. Suddenly there was a bang, much closer to us now. We both scrambled in the dark. I followed her, barely able to see. We made it back to the stairway and ran up the stairs with our lights back on. When we were a couple levels higher, we felt it was okay to speak at a normal volume again. Francesca told me the police never come in here, so it may have been other explorers. But the weird thing was there was no sign of another light in that corridor. Nobody normal would be walking in the dark. Then we heard sounds echoing from the exit stair shaft, where we just were. Someone was coming up the stairs. Once again, we scrambled. She led the way, saying she knew where to go. We ran for a few minutes through this maze of a building. I was truly freaking out. It seemed like we were being followed, and I wasn't sure if I would rather have it been the cops or someone else. She led us to this mini outside spot. We weren't on the highest rooftop, but I guess we were on what you'd call the rooftop of this level. We stopped to catch our breath. The whole being followed thing was killing the vibe completely. Even she seemed concerned, and I looked her as the expert with this place. After a few minutes, we relaxed a bit, and went through this broken window into the ceiling of this one large room. This part was scary, because she wanted to walk along these long, narrow wooden planks with a 10-foot drop below us. A fall from this height would cause injury, but I didn't want to seem like a pussy. I followed her across this sketchy long wooden board until we got to the top of this pillar where one board stopped and another one started. We sat on this pillar to just chill and talk, with our legs dangling over the edge overlooking the darkness below. It was creepy in there, and I thought we were all alone, until there was a sound from below us. It sounded like someone walking. Our presence was already made known to whoever was in there, so we turned on our flashlights and aimed them down below. And right below us, standing at the pillar, looking up at us, there was this 40-something-year-old man in a black Carhartt beanie, wearing a black jacket and black sweatpants. He smiled at us and said in this creepy deep voice, "Come on down," as he was waving us to come down. I asked, "Are you police?" He disregarded my question as if he didn't hear me and repeated, "Come on down," with his creepy smile. Francesca and I got up scared and started walking back across the narrow piece of wood. I was even more scared of falling now than before. I had no idea what that man would do to us. As we were about halfway across, the man hurried out of the room below us through a door. He was most definitely going to try to catch us. We had to hurry. We made it across and tried to get out of there, knowing that man was dangerous. As we were running down the stairs in a shaft on the opposite side of the hospital, we heard the door a few flights above us open and slam shut, and then footsteps stomping down the steps. He somehow had followed us. We were hauling ass as if we were running for our lives. We made it back to the first floor, and we ran back to the opposite side of the hospital where we entered from. We went back to the basement and climbed through the broken window. The whole process of climbing through that window was haunting, because I went out second, and I was afraid my legs would be grabbed at any moment. But I think by that point we lost the man. We ran back across the parking lot back to my car, and when we made it, first thing we did was lock the doors and catch our breath again. That was a complete nightmare, and somehow, us getting through it together created a sort of instant bond between us. We drove away from there and stopped at a Wendy's to get food and just collect our thoughts in the car. We chilled for an hour just talking, and then I dropped her off. Francesca and I have stayed in contact through the years, and while we were romantically involved for a few months, we ended up just staying good friends. Neither of us ever returned to that hospital again. I live in Branson, Missouri, and not far from my house is an abandoned theme park called Celebration City. It's been abandoned for over a decade now, having closed in 2008. It was themed after America in the 20th century. It was opened in the afternoon into the evening, with each operating day closing out with a laser and fireworks display. The park featured many rides, shows, and attractions, and its operating season ran from May until mid-September. I had been there several times with my family as a kid, and when it closed down, we were all definitely saddened to hear. They tore down most, if not all, of the roller coasters before closing, but even still, to this day, most of the buildings still stand, and it's a little known fact that it's kind of a very cool place to explore now, low-key. My friend, who I'll call Calvin, was very on board with my idea of going to check it out. I asked him because he's a family friend, and our families had been to the park together in the past. We drove over and parked in the Steak and Shake parking lot across the street, since the parking lot to the theme park had obviously been closed off for a very long time. It was around 7 p.m., the sun was setting. We didn't want to go in broad daylight in fear of getting caught or running into other people. We brought a couple heavy-duty flashlights for when it would get dark. In the meantime, we could see just fine at first. We jogged across the street when no one was looking, as we didn't want to be obvious about trespassing in the park. When no cars were coming, we cut into the grass and into the trees surrounding the property of the park. It was surprisingly easy to sneak into the park. In fact, it didn't even really feel like we were sneaking in at all. Not that I'm encouraging anyone to trespass. Seeing all the old buildings and attractions I remembered from when I was a kid still standing in this now cold and empty setting was so eerie. It's like a part of my childhood was dead. One thing was for sure though, we were the only people in this place. No other sounds but the crickets. We couldn't even hear the traffic from outside. As we walked around, we realized so much was left behind. It was clear that people had been here since it closed because of writings and occasional graffiti on the wall, but lots of props and such were still in place or behind the glass in buildings. Some of the buildings had broken glass though, indicating people had broken in and explored some of them. As it got darker, we decided to crawl in through one of these windows to one of the buildings. Once inside, we realized it was the diner once called Last Chance Diner. It was dark inside and admittedly creepy. The front door was closed, locked, and covered. There were oddly planks of wood and I guess other random debris and objects laying all around the dining space. The best I could describe it, it seemed like it was being used for storage. Like things from outside were brought into there. Calvin was checking out the other side of the place. I yelled to him I'm checking out the bathroom. Then I proceeded to one of the bathrooms. There was a different smell in here, not possible to explain, but there were 3 stalls in here, and as soon as I got in there was a sound from one of them, like something really small being dropped to the floor. I said, "Hello?" I had my flashlight on in this pitch black room. All 3 stall doors were closed, but something made a noise in there. I held the bathroom door open with my foot, then got on my knees, and aimed the flashlight below one of the stalls, and I saw a pair of shoes and legs. I gasped and jumped, then looked under the other 2 stalls, and there was the same thing. There were 3 pairs of shoes and legs visible under the stall doors, and one of them began to move as if they were getting down on their knees to look under the stall door, but I didn't stick around long enough to see their face. I was already out of the bathroom yelling for Calvin to leave. I climbed back out through the window, and he followed me, not asking questions till we were out and away from that building. I told him about the 3 people in the stalls. He made a joke that they were taking a shit, but I knew that meant he didn't entirely believe me. I told him one of them was about to look under the stall. When I tried to explain the bizarre sight better to him, his expression changed to a more freaked out look. We clearly weren't alone there, and if those were just 3 friendly people also there exploring but just using the bathroom, I feel like they would have said something as I came in, or definitely after I said hello in there. By the time we were out of the park and back to the car, it was pretty much pitch black out. We haven't returned there since. I don't have an explanation for what I saw. It was scary and weird, and definitely switched the mood of what was otherwise a fun day. I'm a 30-year-old woman living alone in a mid to lower income area. There's some crime in my town, but I don't live in a ghetto. Still, sometimes I do feel a little uncomfortable. I don't know a lot of my neighbors too well, other than my next door neighbors, who are both nice. The houses across the street are a different story. I like knowing my neighbors because it makes me feel a little safer living alone. I'm a big scaredy cat, so my biggest fears of living alone came true when one night I was in bed trying to fall asleep. It was pretty late on a work night, past 11. I heard the leaves slightly crunching on the side of the house. Human or not, I couldn't tell. There are a lot of cats and raccoons walking around here at night. The following night, I was awoken to something outside my window, like a singular crack or tap. It must have been the window frame. It was October, so I still had the windows open for air. So I guess out of pure instincts, I said, "Who's there?" I didn't hear anything after that. I got up and lifted my blind, and no one was outside. 2 nights in a row of this, I was starting to think I was getting paranoid over the smallest things, like regular house noises. So I tried to fall back asleep, but that same night, I woke up again. This time to some scratching or scraping sound from the backyard. I heard it through the window. I got up from my bed and went out to the little living space by the back door. I heard the clicking louder now. It was right outside the sliding door. I turned on the light in the living space, and then the sound stopped. I went over to the sliding door, which is covered by a sliding curtain. I was so scared to pull it, expecting to see someone, but when I yanked it open like a band-aid, no one was there. I flicked on the backyard light and slid open the door. I was relieved to see no one out there, including raccoons or some other pests. I listened to the crickets for a minute, then heard something in my tiny yard. Something rustling in the bush. I looked at the bushes. They're too thick to really see anything, but they're definitely a good place for someone to hide. And if that sound wasn't a raccoon or possum, I didn't want to know what it was. I went back inside. I made sure everything was locked. I went back to my room and even locked my bedroom door. After about 10 minutes of laying in my bed, there was a knock at my front door this time. I was starting to freak out now. I ignored it and stayed in my bed. No one should be knocking this late at night. If it happened again, I'd call 911. It didn't happen again. I somehow fell asleep eventually after that. The next day, I went straight to Best Buy with my brother, and he helped me pick out a doorbell camera and a security camera set. He helped me install both of them, the doorbell camera in the front and the other cameras in the back, both in low-key spots. My brother also spent the night that night to make me feel better. He slept in the guest bedroom. We were both in our own beds trying to sleep when I got an alert on my phone, motion detected on my property. I opened the Ring app and I screamed because there was someone in the black and white video trying to pick the lock to the back door of my house. I woke up my brother and showed him the video, and he burst out of the bed and without shoes or socks on, ran out into the backyard ready to kill someone. But my scream chased the person away, which we saw while playing the video back. My brother screamed outside my yard to never come back as loud as he could, and undoubtedly, the person trying to break in heard it. We couldn't identify the man's face. He had a hood over his head and was wearing all dark clothing, but not in a single frame could we see his face. He was also wearing gloves, which meant he left no fingerprints. We called the police, even knowing there wasn't much they could do. It just felt like we needed to have them come to keep a lookout. After that night, nothing similar ever happened again. Not to toot my own horn, but I am on the more attractive side, and what really scares me is the possibility that this was someone who knew who I am, a young single woman living alone in a house. It makes me wonder if it's possible that this was someone who lives on my street, one of my neighbors. I guess I'll never know. When my mom and dad divorced, my mom got 2 of the 5 houses that my dad owned. My dad owns a very successful real estate company, so we have or had places basically everywhere. I'm 23 years old, so I really just stay wherever I want, but I usually stay at one of my mom's houses now because I'm closer with her. This was one of the many weeks that my mom was at our beach house, and I was alone at the main house. I'm used to having the house to myself more often than not. The setup in the main house is a kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms upstairs, and then the same thing on the first floor, and then a basement. My bedroom is in the upstairs. I mainly use the kitchen and living room up there too, while my mom uses the downstairs for herself. It's a nice setup. The house has 3 entrances, a front, back, and a side entrance. The side entrance leads out to where all the garbage cans and such are. I usually go out that door when taking out the trash. Anyway, the story really begins when I started noticing a lot of my clothes were missing. I'd call my mom anytime this happened if she wasn't home, and asked if she'd moved anything out of my clothing baskets. Usually she'd say no, since we live in separate floors of the house. But even this couple of weeks that I was home alone, an extended period of time, I was noticing some of my favorite shirts were missing. My room is usually pretty messy, admittedly, but even after digging through everything, I couldn't find a bunch of specific pieces of clothing. It made no sense. I even resorted to checking my car and the downstairs in my mom's room. Nothing. I came up with the idea that maybe one of my friends or multiple friends took my clothes for whatever reason, or more realistically that they'd eventually just come up on their own, and I just left it at that. When I'm alone, I sleep with the door cracked open just so I could hear if, God forbid, someone were trying to break in. I was watching a movie on my laptop when my bedroom door suddenly shut. It didn't slam, but it didn't exactly close softly either. I had the ceiling fan on and both windows, so I thought maybe it was a draft. It does sometimes happen. But then I heard something from outside my bedroom down in the hall. My reaction isn't exactly what most people would do while home alone. I got out of bed and ran to the door and opened it. The hallway light was off. I turned it on, then walked towards the living room, and there was no one sitting on the couch or anything nightmarish like that. I wasn't satisfied yet, though. I went downstairs to my mom's floor and looked around, in her rooms, kitchen, and living room. But then I noticed the basement door ajar. The light switch for the basement is right atop the stairs. It's a string you pull down. I went down into the basement, the relatively unused basement. There's just a couch, TV, a few workout machines, and a small room with a punching bag down there. There's also 4 doors that lead to closets, and a smaller door you have to crouch down into to get into this little crawlspace type closet. Neither my mom nor I really go down there at all. I caught through my peripheral vision. The little door to the crawlspace closet moved just a little bit. My heart literally dropped, but I approached it just a little bit. I stopped and now felt like my heart just completely stopped as well when an arm came out from the darkness of the little closet and pulled the door ever so lightly shut. I quietly but quickly went back up the stairs, wanting to run and be out of this house. I called 911 first thing and reported that there was a stranger in my house. Thank God I was quiet about leaving the basement and didn't give away the fact that I saw. The police showed up with their lights on, but not their sirens. All 4 of them came down to the basement with me, and they ordered the person in the closet out. The door slowly opened, and there was a bald, 50-something-year-old man with a nose too small for his squished-looking face. He had his hands up, and he was wearing one of my shirts. In fact, inside of the crawl-in closet were a number of my mom and I's belongings, mostly clothing. The whole closet smelled like piss, which begged the question how long he'd been there. Since there was no visible damage in the house other than piss stains, but several of our belongings were found in his possession, he was charged with 3rd-degree burglary. Somehow that's it. My mom and I obviously didn't want any of the clothes that gross creep wore back. I blame myself for most likely leaving the side door unlocked one night after taking out the trash. I learned my lesson. Lock the doors. The idea that someone could be in your house, even living in it at any moment because of an unlocked door, should not be taken lightly. I'm 18 years old, going to be a freshman in college this September. This past July, My friend Miranda held a pool party in her backyard as a sort of graduation party, minus any of her family being around because her parents were away. She often has the house to herself, so her parents' house is the go-to spot for a lot of hangouts. She invited like 100 people from our grade. There had to be upwards of 150 people there at the night's peak. I was one of the first to show up with my friend Jonah, because we're close with Miranda, so we wanted to help out a little bit. By the time people started showing up, everyone congregated slowly from the kitchen and living room to outside in the backyard by the pool. Some people brought their bathing suits and jumped into the pool. Others just jumped in their underwear. And then of course most others just stood around the pool. She has a huge backyard. At a certain point, so many people were at the party that it was clear as day people were bringing friends from other schools because we didn't know everyone there, and Miranda was getting mad because she made it clear she didn't want randoms. In fact, unfamiliar people seemed to be just barging through the gate, not even accompanied with people from our school or grade. There wasn't much we could do though. The party was already too crazy to easily control. Miranda did throw in our class group chat not to bring any more randoms or they'd be asked to leave. The problem seemed to slow down after that. At around 1 a.m., police came to the house and had to shut down the party due to multiple complaints from neighbors. So the music was turned off, and 99% of the guests were asked to leave. Mostly everyone cleared out except a few close friends, including some of Miranda's girlfriends, Jonah and I, and a few other guy friends. We helped do some cleaning, like picking up all the empty cans and bottles. Eventually, it was just 4 of us left there. I'm talking at like 3 a.m., if not later. Since it was hot outside, we migrated to the inside of the house in the air conditioning, where we were just chilling in the living room continuing to drink. Then we all heard a distinct crack from upstairs, and we went silent. Miranda was the first to ask what was that, as we all looked at each other with these wide-eyed, half-laughing, half-freaked-out faces. Jonah and I laughed, teasing Miranda that someone was upstairs in her room, and she begged us to stop and check it out. So we did. We went upstairs to Miranda's room. It was clear. We then went to the guest room that used to be her older brother's room, and we found one of our friends, Steve, passed out in the bed. We went downstairs to tell her that Steve was upstairs and knocked out. I guess that gave her a sigh of relief. Looking back, that didn't much explain a sound coming from upstairs if he was knocked out in bed though. But we weren't exactly the most coherent at that moment. Eventually, Miranda and her friend Mel went to sleep in her room. Jonah fell asleep on the couch. I went to her parents' bed. None of us were okay to drive anywhere. I can't remember how much time passed before I remember one of the girls screaming in the next room over, and then both of them. It was a heart-dropping kind of moment, but I didn't know if they were messing around with each other at first or not. But I realized pretty quickly the screams were way too real. I burst out of the bed and went to Miranda's room and opened the door. The lights were out. I could barely see anything, except for the 2 girls huddled up hugging each other in the corner of the room, basically curled up on the floor. I saw what they were screaming at. There was a tall person in the opposite corner of the room, on the other side of the bed from them. I saw him looking at me in the doorway. I yelled at the girls to run, and they did. There was so much yelling that even Steve woke up and came out. As the girls ran downstairs screaming that the man was touching their feet, we followed. But looking back, with 3 guys there, we regrettably didn't try to overpower that one man. We all left the house, and one of us called the police, waiting by the neighbor's house with the neighbors, possibly the same ones who called the cops on the party. We didn't see the man leave the front door ever, and after police searched the house and couldn't find him, that meant he left through the back door. None of us recognized who that man was. It was probably an older man who knew Miranda somehow that snuck into the house during the commotion of the party and thought Miranda would be alone after the party. It's some sick, scary stuff. Whether we could have overpowered him or not, we'll never know, because we don't know if he was armed. There's a nice, quiet, scenic creek not far from my house. I like to drive my kayak up to it every once in a while on the weekends in the summer. This one particular weekend was one of those weekends. The weather was perfect, sunny and 70s. I'd kayaked down this creek a bunch of times, and never had I seen anyone else kayaking it. That's part of the reason I like it, because I'm a very reserved person and I like to do things myself, preferably with privacy. So I set out on the kayak not far from where I parked my car, which is some gravelly dirt parking area right off the road. There was one other car that pulled in a few minutes after I did, which was unusual. I'd never seen any other cars except my own here. 20 minutes into my kayaking, someone came out from the woods ahead of me coming up on the left and approached the edge of the water. He stopped and waved at me and smiled. He put his hands on his hips and greeted me. It seemed he had an expectation for me to stop and chat. I instantly knew I didn't like his smile, but my mother raised me to be polite to everybody, so I stopped paddling and smiled and greeted him back. There was an awkward pause where he was just nodding his head with his closed-lipped smile, and I had to break the silence by saying it's a beautiful day out. He nodded his head and said yup, then asked where I'm from. I made something up and said, from up north, just visiting. He clearly lacked the ability to hold any sort of conversation, and that's coming from me, who's not the most social person myself, so I wanted to just move along. I told him to have a great rest of his day, and continued onward down the river. Never in a million years was I expecting what happened next to happen. I turned when I heard a snap of a stick or something from not far behind me. There in the not so far distance was the guy, hiding behind a couple trees, seemingly following me. I was disturbed and uncomfortable, like he was clearly trying to not be seen. I was scared to call him out in fear of how he might respond, so I pretended not to notice him and continued to kayak down the creek. I would continue to side glance every so often to see if he was still following me, and he was. I had never wanted to see someone else in the water so much in my life. I took out my phone to try to call my dad or my brother for help, but of course I had no cell reception out there. Still, instead of being followed and probably attacked, I decided to stop in my place, turn around, and threaten to call the police if he didn't stop following me. The man just stood in place behind another big tree, though he was clear as day there. I then decided to fake call the cops. I raised my phone in the air at the man, and I said, "I see you there, I'm calling them now." I then proceeded to fake a phone call, pretending like I'm talking to the police. The man started to walk away deeper into the woods. It seemed to have worked. I turned around immediately and started kayaking back up the way I came as fast as I possibly could. I would constantly look over my shoulders until I got back to where I launched the kayak. I made it safely. I checked my whole surroundings before stepping out of the water and carrying my kayak back to my car. The other car in the little parking area was still there, but I made a disturbing discovery that may have saved my life. Up until this point, everything that happened could have maybe been explained away. However, I noticed broken glass near the back of my car, and the back passenger side window wasn't there anymore. It had been shattered. I didn't step 1 foot closer to my car. I stayed hidden in the woods and checked if I had bars now that I was closer to the road. I did, and I called 911 successfully. I reported the whole incident and the broken window, and I stated I was scared I was still being followed. Waiting for the police to arrive felt like the longest, most tense moment of my life. It dragged on far too long, but when they pulled into the dirt area, I finally came out from the woods and waved at them. I pointed to the car, and 2 police officers came out and approached the car where they found him, the man from the woods, waiting in the back seat of my car, hiding, waiting for me to enter my car to grab me. It was beyond satisfying to see him arrested. He definitely wasn't smiling anymore. I looked at him, as it almost seemed like he was avoiding looking at me as he was taken to the police car. I'm happy the man was so stupid that he thought I wouldn't notice shattered glass all over the side of my car. What you're about to hear is something that will sound like it was straight from a horror movie, but it's absolutely true. Every summer, my friends and I go on a camping trip to a new location. It's a tradition we've had for years. One year, we chose a hiking trail in West Glacier, Montana. My friend Luke is a photographer, so he always likes to bring his camera equipment and get lots of nature shots. Our first day there, the 3 of us did a lot of hiking and exploring, taking in the sights and allowing Luke to get a lot of shots. That first night there, nothing was out of the ordinary. We had 2 tents. I was alone in mine while the other 2 shared theirs. The next day, we did some fishing at a nearby river, and a few other things that aren't really that interesting to talk about. But that second night was where things got weird. The fire had just been put out, and we went to our respective tents. None of us had even fallen asleep yet, when we started hearing sounds from out in the woods. It was very clearly a person's voice. It sounded like an older woman's voice. It kept getting louder and more clear every 10 seconds or so. I called over to my friend's tent right next to mine, asking if they heard that, and they called back saying yes. Someone was out there. The voice got so close and so clear that we could hear her saying hello. I was shaking in my socks. Maybe you might think we're bad people for not jumping to help an older woman who may have been stranded in the woods, but that just didn't seem right, and being in the middle of the woods at night hearing someone calling out hello is beyond terrifying. I heard footsteps approach the tent, then stop. The voice once again said hello, but it was right outside the tent this time, and now that it was this close, it didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded like a man trying to sound like a woman, raising the pitch in his voice. The person outside my tent suddenly started shaking the tent aggressively, and I freaked out and screamed, "What do you want?" My friend shouted to go away to the person. The shaking then stopped as suddenly as it started, and I heard the footsteps quickly hurry away. I waited a few moments before unzipping my tent and grabbing my sleeping bag to go to my friend's tent. Even those brief 5 seconds outside the tent, I felt like I was going to be grabbed at any moment. I felt safer as I was in the tent with them and not alone anymore. None of us knew what to think, but we all three agreed it didn't sound like an actual woman. It sounded like some creepy man pretending to be one to get us to let our guards down. The question was, why though? And was he carrying a weapon? Either way, we didn't think it was safe to get up and leave now. We agreed to leave first thing in the morning as soon as the sun would begin to rise. We also agreed that someone would need to stay awake at all times to keep watch, so we agreed to take turns sleeping. My friend Matt took the first shift, while Luke and I tried to sleep, which was hard to do after what just happened, especially when we'd keep thinking we were hearing footsteps surrounding the tent. Eventually though, after many tense hours, I managed to fall asleep out of pure exhaustion. I never woke up until morning time, because apparently Luke fell asleep on his shift, and we were all asleep by that point. We were happy the sun was up, so we packed our stuff and headed back to the truck. It was a long ride home, and during the drive, Luke was going through his camera looking at the shots that he got over the course of the 2 days there. The last 3 pictures, however, were not pictures that he took. There were 2 pictures taken of our campsite while it was still dark out. The 3rd picture was taken inside of our tent, with all 3 of us asleep. Nothing was missing or stolen, strangely enough, and none of us were attacked in any way, yet it remains the most fucked up thing that has ever happened to any of us. Some random creep out in the woods stalking our tent, and waiting for the right moment to enter our campsite, go through our stuff, sneak into our tent, and take a picture of all 3 of us, probably just to freak us out. And whoever it was, they accomplished their goal for sure. I work nights for the sheriff's department in Bergen County. I've been on the force for 2 years. I haven't seen too much craziness aside from late night drug arrests, a few robbery calls, and a few assault calls. Northeastern Bergen County is pretty low crime after all, so those are usually the worst calls I deal with. There was this one night that I received a disturbance call to investigate a scream that came from a house nearby. Usually a call like this would mean a domestic dispute, or even just something as harmless as people drinking and being too loud. I arrived to the house though, and I had to confirm twice that it was the correct house because none of the lights were on. There was a car in the driveway though, a blue Toyota Sienna minivan. Someone was home. I went over to knock on the door a few times. The neighbor must have seen my car because he came out and walked over, reporting that he was the one to call the police. He told me he heard a blood-curdling scream from the house, and that the woman who lives there lives alone but occasionally had her boyfriend over, making it slightly more concerning. I tried the doorknob now, which was locked. I then made my way around the house, trying all the windows, which were all locked. All but one of the backyard windows. It was already slid completely up, enough for someone to climb through. This was a red flag considering every other window was closed. I requested backup to the scene, and once I got confirmation, I climbed into the house through the window. I started to flick every light on that I could find in the house, starting in the kitchen and working my way to the living room. And yes, it's advisable for police to turn on the lights when investigating buildings. What you see in TV shows and movies where they leave the lights off is only done for suspense. I called out for the woman, trying to assure her it's okay, police were here. Though at that time, I still didn't know what exactly the situation was, other than she was reported screaming. There was no response no matter how loud I yelled. The first floor was clear, so there was only the upstairs left to check. I wanted to wait for backup to arrive because I was nervous what I'd find up there, but I'd also not forgive myself if I waited and wasted precious time that I could have used to save this woman from a possible medical emergency. Before going up the stairs, I unlocked the front door for when backup would arrive. I then walked up the carpeted stairs quietly, and as I got halfway up the stairs, I peered over the ledge onto the second floor. There were 4 doors up there. I flicked on the light switch in the hallway and called out one more time. I heard a creak-type sound come from behind one of the doors, so she had to be in there. I opened the door, and it was a bedroom. The light was off, but the light from the hall was plenty to see a woman laying in bed under the covers. I saw the back of her head. I walked over to her to make sure she was okay, but as I was close, I noticed dark stains that soaked the other side of the covers. The side of her I couldn't see from the door. I yanked the covers off the woman and realized it was blood, and she'd been stabbed multiple times, but she was still breathing. I grabbed my walkie and reported a stabbing, requesting immediate backup and an ambulance. The creak I heard moments before suddenly made no sense if this woman was in bed like this, and given she was unconscious, someone placed her in the bed most likely. I did a 360 in place, looking around the room. There was a closet. It was instinctively the first place I'd think to look. I had my gun drawn and had my hand on the doorknob for 5 seconds, gathering the courage to yank the door open. When I finally did, there was no one inside. I turned around again to look at the bed, at the bleeding woman. Then I thought, the bed. I got on my knees to be level with the bottom of the bed. I yanked the bed wrap covering the bottom of the bed up, and I was then eye to eye with a man wearing a face mask covering the lower half of his face. I shrieked and yelled, "Show me your hands." He slowly raised his hands above his head as much as he could. I got up and told him to get out from under the bed slowly and made sure he wasn't holding the knife. I had him stand in the corner with his hands up until my backup came. I wasn't about to try and handcuff him in there alone when he could have any weapon on his person. I told backup to meet me upstairs, and when they entered the house, I called up to them. Only then did I place the man under arrest. An ambulance arrived not too long after, and the woman was rushed to the hospital, and she managed to survive being stabbed 6 times. The man who did it was in fact her boyfriend, which I didn't find too surprising, honestly. The man had found out that she cheated on him with his friend, and when he called her about it, she broke up with him over the phone, and this must have caused the man to snap. I'm just very thankful the woman survived. This story was told to me by my best friend's uncle, who works the night shift as a police officer in our city. A year or so ago, Mike, my best friend's uncle, was out on his nightly patrol with his partner Steve. They've been working together for years, and they're both Army veterans, so they're very level-headed and calm people, perfect for being police officers. When they got a call from a landlord at an apartment complex complaining about one of his tenants, they didn't really expect anything bad. They get calls like that all the time, so they headed over to see what was going on. When they arrived, the landlord greeted them outside. It was probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and everyone from the complex was standing out in the grass, which was odd. The landlord approached Mike and Steve and started to rant about one of their neighbors being crazy and turning all of the water on in his apartment. Apparently he was some guy in his 30s, and he'd been acting weird lately. Mike could see that there was water seeping out from the front door to the place, and decided they had to go in and do a welfare check on the guy. When they walked in, water was pouring down the stairs and clearly flooding the building, which meant that this water had to have been turned on for hours to cause this kind of damage. They climbed to the 2nd story and knocked on the door where the water was gushing out from. The landlord told them that the tenant's name was Adam, and so they pounded on the door calling his name. No one answered for a couple minutes, and so they decided to break the door down. When they did, they spotted Adam standing in his kitchen. All of the sinks, the shower, and the toilet from the bathroom and a hose from outside were gushing water everywhere. Adam was standing there shaking. His eyes were wide like he was terrified to move. "Adam, what's going on? Are you all right?" Mike asked while his partner Steve walked further inside to check everything out. Steve walked into the bathroom to turn off the water and to make sure no one else was in the apartment. Mike slowly approached Adam, who seemed terrified because he was shaking so much. He didn't even look at Mike as he approached. Again, he was asked what was wrong, and he finally stuttered out that there are people in the walls. Mike didn't hear what he was saying at first, but as he got closer, Adam started to hear it over and over, louder and louder. "There are people in the walls." until he was almost screaming it, getting himself worked up. Steve walked into the bedroom next and was clearing the room when he checked the closet and noticed something as he turned on the light. There was a very faint line that ran across the wall. At first he didn't think anything of it, but then he heard what Adam was screaming, and a sinking feeling hit his gut. The more he stared at it, the more he realized that the line was in the shape of a door cut out of the wall. It clearly wasn't meant to be there. Mike was about to lead Adam out of the apartment when Steve suddenly called to him, "You better take a look at this." Mike went into the other room to see Steve pointing his gun at the wall in the bedroom, clearly freaked out. They both approached the door, guns raised, while Adam started to cry in the back room. Steve quickly pulled a piece of wall back, and they both froze when 3 sets of eyes stared back at them. 3 people were pressed together in this tiny space in the wall, their faces painted in weird patterns. Both Steve and Mike ordered them out and handcuffed each one. By that time, backup had arrived and some other police officers got Adam out of there. They led the 3 downstairs and sent them off to jail. Mike and Steve were deeply disturbed by the whole exchange. It was only made worse when a couple months later, they found out that the 3 people on the wall were from some crazy cult out in the woods. They were trying to get Adam to join them. They preyed on him because they knew he had a past history of being mentally unstable. They were trying to scare him. He turned on all the water in an attempt to flush them out of his own home. To this day, Mike and Steve say that this was the most disturbing call they've ever been on. This one time when I was working a 12-hour overnight shift, I went out on a call for a suspicious person walking house to house, knocking on doors, and saying things to people through their doors or to their doorbell cameras. I arrived to the man's house who called it in, and he explained better in person that it was a middle-aged woman with long, wiry hair holding something behind her back, going door to door yelling at people to open up and mumbling to herself. The man who called the police had a Ring doorbell camera, and so he showed me the footage that it caught. The woman came up to the door, looked at the camera for a few minutes, literally, then pressed the button. She started speaking into the mic of the doorbell, and the homeowner started talking back through his phone, starting by asking who she is and what she wants. She kept saying, "Open the door, she needs blood," and would smile and cackle each time she said it. When he threatened to call the police, she laughed and started basically punching the door and trying to remove the Ring doorbell camera from the wall. It wasn't possible to tell if the threat of calling the police is what eventually got her to leave. But when she did, the man saw that she went to the house next door. This was when he actually called 911. The footage was absolutely bone-chilling. It was like a scene from a scary movie, and it wasn't possible to tell what she was holding behind her back because of the creepy way she backed away from the door to the sidewalk, still facing the doorbell camera the entire time. There were 2 or 3 other units on this now, driving around the area trying to find the woman. It was basically a mini manhunt now, and the description being used was possibly armed and dangerous woman. I checked the nearby houses on foot really quickly, then got back in my car and started patrolling the area as well. None of us could find the woman, and then we got a report of a breaking and entering nearby. Someone had called 911 to report that someone had entered their house with a weapon, and the caller was hiding in their bedroom upstairs. The caller also had a doorbell camera and was able to see the woman entering the house through the front door, but not before looking into the camera for a few moments again. I arrived to the house just about the same time as another unit. Entering the house was easy as the front door was left unlocked, of course. We had to enter with caution though, with guns drawn, because we didn't know how dangerous this woman was, or what she could be armed with. As we entered and the foyer was clear, another officer and I shouted that the police were here, and we ordered the intruder to come out with her hands up. Then there was a scream for help from upstairs. My adrenaline was rushing, as it does in any situation like this involving armed suspects. We ran up the stairs and followed the screams for help. They led us to the master bedroom. The husband unlocked and opened the bedroom door as we got upstairs, the husband of the couple sitting and hiding in there. They hadn't left the bedroom since the woman had entered the house, and they said she had been clawing and banging at the door only a few minutes ago, and that they didn't hear her leave, let alone even go down the stairs. We had to check every other room in the upstairs for her, and in one of the corner bedrooms, in the pitch blackness, we heard a cackling sound. Not being able to see her, but to hear her, was downright spine-chilling. I flicked on the light to the bedroom, and she was there sitting on the bed, already looking at me and smiling. She had a huge knife in her hand, and there was blood soaking the bed sheets that she was sitting on. It was her blood. She had just cut one of her wrists. She started saying exactly what she was saying on the first guy's doorbell camera, that she needs blood. We didn't know who she meant until noticing the little doll sitting between her legs. It was a little girl's doll, covered in the woman's blood. We yelled at her to drop the knife with our guns drawn on her. She just laughed and kept saying what she was saying. There was clearly something very wrong with her, and reasoning with her didn't seem like it would be possible, but we tried anyway. I asked her who is this she keeps referencing, and tried to talk nice to her, saying she doesn't have to hurt herself or anybody else and that we're there to help her. But as she continued to stare at us, mainly at me, and laugh and keep muttering barely understandable sentences, I got increasingly nervous. I had my gun aimed at the giant knife in her hand, contemplating shooting it out of her hand, considering if that was a viable, safe option, but neither of us were expecting what happened next. The crazed woman sprang off the bed and made this growling sound as she was about to lunge at me and presumably attack me as her knife was raised in the air. I reacted the only way I could in the moment, and I shot at her twice, both times hitting her in the arm, as even though I was still trying to have my sight aimed on the knife, I wasn't expecting her to just jump up suddenly. She dropped the knife and started to scream and cry as she grabbed her arm. We took this moment to subdue her and place her in cuffs. We had to get her an ambulance immediately before she'd bleed out. From the hospital, she'd later be transported to a local jail, and she was later found not guilty on all charges by reason of insanity. She's currently a patient at a mental asylum in my city. The horror that every party involved in this incident had to go through was unimaginable. From all the people who were scared to open their doors to a crazed woman welding something unknown behind her back, to the couple that actually almost fell victim to her in their own house, to myself and the other officer that were on the scene before she was in custody. It was the scariest experience of my 10 years being a police officer. Years ago, I did the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. It was around my second or third month that this guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall. He had long, stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. But after a while, he one night asked me my name. I told him my name, and he just kept saying, "Rob, I like that," as he'd laugh to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he just bought and walked out of the store talking to himself. He was clearly hammered. This was the night I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every single time that he'd come to the store. I watched as he left, and he walked out of sight off the gas station property. That would make sense. He never once bought gas anytime he came in. He'd always just buy alcohol. I'd seen him just about every night after that for a while. He'd come in, some nights noticeably drunker than others, and sometimes he'd just lean on one of the shelves for a while and not say anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey Rob" anytime he'd come in. One night he was just leaning on a shelf, drinking the tall boy he just bought, not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I asked him for his name finally. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." Now, I always felt like Bob is a go-to fake name when you're lying about your name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob because it rhymes with my name, but I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he doesn't work. He said the government completely fucked him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry-looking face, but interestingly said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. I didn't see him again for a while. I'd say over a week passed, which for a regular like him was a while. Bob always gave me this off, mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. Well, one very stormy night, with less customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone entered, and I swear before looking I imagined it to be Bob, and when I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him. But it was a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked. He wasn't wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella. He was just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door, looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked like he was angry, and yet his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running. The way he was standing there blankly, staring at nothing, completely soaked, it was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me, said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register towards the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out from the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene. And then, the next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the two restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said, "Bob," in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob, with his eyes opened wide, and he lunged at me and started screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I pushed him off of me as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store. He didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. I stayed on the line with her, and it didn't take long for a couple police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner, apparently like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge. I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station after I told them that he lunged at me, threatened to kill me, and stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin, and he had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night that he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this night. I've done a lot of night driving in my life. Not for work or anything. My old friend group and I would always just stay out till crazy hours when we were in our late teens and early 20s. I guess you could say we were the losers. We thought staying out till 5 a.m. every weekend hanging at parks or in parking lots was cool. Looking back, it was a stupid waste of time. But basically for that reason, I've done my fair share of driving at off hours in the night. And usually that's when the drunkos and crazy people are on the roads. It was a weekend night. It had to be approaching 4 in the morning. I wanted to go home. I drove one of my friends home from the park we were hanging out at, and before driving myself home, I had to stop for gas. I used to like getting gas at night because there would be no other cars in the way. I pulled into one of my usual gas stations not far from my parents' house. As I was walking to the building to pay, there was a short guy wearing a hood walking past me. He stopped in his tracks and stared me down as I walked past. I said, "What?" as I kept walking. He said nothing, so I kept walking. Typical crackhead. I went inside the building to pay the attendant for my gas. I also bought a lottery ticket while I was there. I came back outside and started to fill up. I looked around, and as expected, it was a ghost town at this hour. Once done, I got back in the car and started driving home. Halfway home, I heard something behind me, in the car. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was someone in the rear seat looking back at me. I let out a scream so loud I probably almost collapsed my lungs. I slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Get out." It was the dude from the gas station. I opened my doors and started screaming help, knowing at least a couple people would come out from their houses. Sure enough, a couple houses' porch lights turned on, and I saw some doors opening. The guy got out of my car and said I could have slit your throat. As some people came out of their houses, he started to run away down the street. I didn't chase after him. A couple people came over to me and asked if I was alright, and I told them how a stranger was in my back seat. By now, the guy was out of sight. I wasn't about to start driving around after a crackhead. I thanked the people who came out and continued my drive home, making sure I didn't see him anywhere the rest of the drive. That was the scariest experience of my life. This event happened in the mid-60s in the Atlanta area. At that time, I was about 8 or 9 years old. My father taught school in a suburb of Atlanta that was some distance from where our home was located. I went to the same school where he taught, so I rode with him every day. However, we had to get up very early each morning and head out before the sun was up. We always stopped several mornings each week to top off on gas at a small, independent station. We were often the first car there shortly after the station opened. In those days, everything was full service. There was a booth with an attendant who would come out and fill your tank, wash your windows, etc. He would always be carrying a wad of bills in his pocket and a device on his belt from which he counted out coins. Behind the pumps were tiny bathrooms. I would often use the bathroom on mornings that we stopped there, as it was a fairly long drive. One morning, we again arrived before dawn to find the station completely deserted. It was totally quiet other than the traffic sounds going by. There was no sign of an attendant, either in the booth or anywhere else around the station. My father blew the car horn once, then again a few more times, but there was no response. We discussed what might be the problem. My father first suggested that perhaps the attendant might be in the bathroom, but when he still did not appear, my father said that maybe the attendant had experienced car trouble and had not been able to make it to work on time. We continued to wait for several minutes. No other cars pulled in. I told my father I needed to use the bathroom and put my hand on the car door handle to get out, but he told me that we could not wait any longer and I could use the bathroom at the next station we came to. So we left, still wondering what happened. A day or two later, my father was reading the local newspaper when I heard a loud exclamation from him. He excitedly told my mother and I about a small article which stated that the body of a gas station attendant had been discovered with multiple stabs stuffed into the men's bathroom of the station. It was the station we always went to. The article said the motive appeared to be robbery, as all cash and coins were missing. Early in the morning, the total amount of money was probably not a lot. The article gave no hint as to what amount was taken, but either way, that didn't stop the killer. I've often wondered how I would have been affected at that young age if I had insisted on going to the bathroom at that station and had opened the door to discover the body of the murdered attendant. We never went to that gas station again. This took place when I was 25. I was driving from North to South Texas, and due to my work schedule, I could only do this late at night. I was on Route 281 for much of the drive, and at these late hours, it was an easy, straight drive. I just had to keep myself awake. I was already kind of shot from work, and then getting on the road right after was brutal. I had to keep making stops for coffee at random gas stations just to keep myself going. I think it was my third time starting to feel a little sleepy, and on top of that, I needed to fill up my tank as well. I pulled into the first gas station I could find on the desolate side roads. I can't remember what kind of gas station it was, maybe a Sunoco or Shell. There was one other car in the parking lot. I parked next to one of the pumps and went inside. There were two people in the shop, the cashier, and then I noticed another guy pacing down the aisles. I went to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. The guy who was pacing around came up to me and said, "Careful, it's hot," and then he laughed. It was a piss-poor, creepy, unnecessary attempt at starting a conversation that I didn't bite at. I was not in the mood. I didn't reply, and I took the coffee to the cashier where I paid for it as well as for the gas. The guy came up behind me while I was paying and said, "I really like that top." I said thank you just loud enough for him to hear. He followed it up with, "Where are you heading off to so late at night?" I was so annoyed by this point, I firmly asked him to leave me alone. The cashier was some 40-something-year-old Hispanic man. I wasn't sure how much English he understood, or if he was even reading the situation that was happening in front of him, but he was also a smaller, shorter man, and it was doubtful he was going to step in at all. The man behind me said calm down after I asked him to leave me alone. I left the shop without saying another word and went to my car. I heard the door open again a few seconds after I left the shop. I was next to my car now, preparing to fill up the tank. As gas started pumping into my car, I heard his footsteps on the concrete over on the other side of the pumps. Then they stopped. When the footsteps stopped, I glanced over, and I noticed him, creepily standing on the other side of the pump I was using. He was quite literally just standing there watching me. He wasn't filling up gas. There wasn't even a car there. I started considering grabbing my pepper spray from my center console. The guy said, "Are you alone?" When he asked that, the gravity of the situation escalated greatly. I replied, "No, my boyfriend is in the car." I opened the door and quickly grabbed the pepper spray from the center console. I grabbed it and held it at my side, pretending to still be focused on pumping the gas. The man was inching his way around the gas pump, like he was coming around to my side. He said, "I don't see anyone in the car." I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it up at the man, and he laughed and backed away. He said he was just trying to make conversation. He was walking backwards with his focus locked onto me still. I was just about done pumping gas. Then I felt and heard a clank. The gas stopped pumping. My tank was full. I had like $6 worth of change. I had to go back inside to get it. The man was in between the shop and I. I had to make a choice. I made the decision to get my change. I had my arm up in the air still, pointing the pepper spray can at him. He continued to back away, chuckling. When it was safe, I turned my back to him and entered the shop, and asked the cashier for change. I told the cashier that that man was making me really uncomfortable, but it seemed like he didn't really understand what I was saying. Once I got my change, I looked out the glass door into the parking lot before leaving. I didn't see that man out there. I was scared to go out there. Like, what if you were hiding somewhere? I stepped outside in front of the shop. I didn't leave that little sidewalk. I just stayed there, looking around. That man was gone, out of sight, which meant he was absolutely hiding. Eventually, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot and pulled next to one of the pumps. A large man with a beard stepped out, and I went over to him asking him for help. I asked him to check if there was a man hiding behind my car. He was confused, but he did it for me. He got to the other side of my car, and he yelled, "What are you doing?" And there went that creepy man, hurrying away from behind my car. He started to run away into the darkness surrounding the gas station. I thanked that man so much, and he said in his thick southern accent to be careful out there. I left that parking lot in a hurry, and I continued the rest of my drive. That creepy man was 100% waiting to pounce as soon as I unlocked my car doors. And that's really disturbing to me. When I was in high school, I had a couple of close friends, Jason and Brian. We did quite a bit together, and when it came time to graduate, Jason had to move away to Lexington, South Carolina with his family due to his father's work. After we graduated and he had completed his move with his family, my friend Brian and I were invited to pay a visit for a weekend to his new house. We decided out of boredom to start hiking around in the nearby forest and countryside, which we found had a scenic river. It was a beautiful area and felt quite peaceful, but we ended up getting lost. We decided to keep following the river as we lost track of which direction was upstream or downstream, with no sounds of civilization anywhere we could hear. We quickly became concerned about finding a telephone to call Jason's mom or dad to get us from wherever we were, even though there was no paved road or street that we could find nearby. As we kept following the river, we came to this old church-looking building made of really old red bricks with a dirt parking lot and a dirt road leading up to it. It was very encroached with growth and bushes. We decided to go inside and see if there were people, and maybe ask to use their telephone and get the address for this location. We noticed there were a few old cars, which looked to be 70s or 80s, possibly Novas, 4 of them. Very dirty and rusted in this dirt parking lot with flat or missing tires. They were all white colored, or used to be, and parked in a row side by side. As we got closer, we heard gospel music sounds and some singing inside the church. We were relieved that there were people, so we went into the church, which appeared to be rather old and dilapidated. We peeked past the main doors to the hall and saw what I estimated was a couple dozen people dressed as nicely as they could, though they clearly were poor. When we went inside, the old white-haired woman wearing horn-rimmed glasses who was playing the church piano stopped playing, and she looked at us with no expression on her face. What happened next really stuck with me, and I will never forget it as long as I live. Everyone in that church stopped singing and put down their song sheets, and they all slowly turned their heads and looked at us with the most vacant and unwelcoming glares. Jason said, "We're sorry to interrupt. We just want to use your phone to call my folks to come get us." Nobody spoke. It was dead silent in that church other than the wooden pews creaking from the weight of the people in them. So we just slowly backed out of the door and let it close behind us, and looked at each other in ominous fear and quietly left. We started walking up that dirt road, and when Brian mentioned that there were no crosses or anything Christian in there, we looked back up the road to see that maybe a dozen of those people, all men, had walked out in the front of the church and were standing there watching us intently as we walked along the road. This freaked us out, and we began to sprint up that dirt road for what felt like a good half hour. We finally came to a very old, broken-down gas station that looked like one of those old full-service stations. We went inside to find that the shelves were mostly empty and dusty from a quick glance, and an old, overly tanned, swarthy man with a really oily and dirty baseball cap was behind the counter reading some old book with ragged edges and yellowed pages. He looked up and said, "You boys lost, huh? Just head out that way you came in and make a left, and follow that road till you see a telephone pole, and just go right at the pole down the trail and it'll take you to a highway." We thanked the man and left quickly, and as we walked down the road to the telephone pole the man told us about, again looked back, and the old man was out in front of the gas station with his arms folded, just staring at us with a rotten-toothed grin on his face. We got to the pole, made the right, and followed that trail to the nearest highway, after about a good half hour of walking in the twilight. It had just gotten dark as we got to the highway, and we tried to wave down a few people passing by, but nobody stopped. Thankfully, a police officer saw us and pulled over to help us. We told him we were lost and gave him Jason's address, to which he whistled and said we really were lost. It took about 30 minutes for that officer to drive us back to Jason's, and during the chit-chat, he told us we needed to be careful out in those woods, as there are some crazy witch folks in it. A long time ago, I'm talking like 8 years ago, 2 friends and I, James and Sean, did something really stupid. But at the time, doing stupid things was what we did to pass the time. We're not really friends with James anymore, but Sean and I still talk often, and so oftentimes we'll talk with each other about this story. We were 19 years old. We lived in bumfuck New Jersey. Lots of vacant houses in our old town. And atop a hilly road not far from our houses was an abandoned church. Locals knew about the church. It was on a closed-off road, and it had been abandoned for many years. I'm not sure if it's still standing or what the current state of it is, as I live in Florida now. But James, Sean, and I, being the troublemaking thrill-seekers we were, came up with this genius plan of bringing a Ouija board to the church late one night. This was October, so I guess we were doing it in honor of spooky season. Sean had the Ouija board in his closet, so he brought it. I drove the 3 of us, so I first picked up James, then Sean, and we just drove straight towards the church. Since the road up the hill to the church was literally blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. We followed the road up the hill to the church, using one flashlight at first, so as not to overdo it and draw any possible attention. But once we were atop the hill, we pretty much all 3 of us turned on our flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods in basically all directions, and had a gravel parking lot alongside it. The church had been broken into a million times before, and was littered with graffiti, so the big front door was already ajar. 2 of us had to work together to pull it open because it scraped on the floor though. Once inside, we naturally just looked around the place with our flashlights to make sure no one else was in there. It was definitely creepy being in that place at night. Sean set up the Ouija board. Then he pulled out these 3 candles from his backpack as well. and he laughed and said it would add to the experience. He placed the 3 candles in a triangle formation around the board, and as they were all lit, we turned off our flashlights. Now the only light in the whole place was from the candles, creating a much more eerie and uncomfortable vibe. We really couldn't see more than maybe 6 feet in all directions, so we began playing with the Ouija board. Sean was doing most of the talking. At this point, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he definitely opened with "Is anybody there?" and the typical cliche Ouija board questions. The planchette started to move and we started to laugh. I knew it was one of them doing it. I feel like it's not possible to play with a Ouija board with your friends without someone jokingly moving around the planchette. We went along with it though, and whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. As this was going on though, we heard a weird crack type sound come from the altar of the church. Best way I could describe it is it sounded like a big piece of wood cracking in half. It was loud and it sounded like it was done by someone. We all jumped in reaction and hurried to shine our phone's flashlights in the direction of the altar. There was no one there as far as we could see. I think both of them were just as freaked out as I was after that. But the place was old and falling apart, so some weird noises here and there didn't seem that crazy, and so we kept going. We all took turns asking the board questions, but the planchette was no longer moving. I think because that crack sound freaked all 3 of us out, and now we were taking it more seriously. This went on for some time, until another sound from the altar area broke the silence again. But before we even had time to shine our lights over there again, something landed on the Ouija board, causing all of us to jump and scream. It was a rock about the size of a golf ball. All 3 of us just had our hands on the planchette 2 seconds ago, and there was no way any of us could have done that. We all 3 got up and ran back out of the church screaming, leaving the Ouija board and candles behind. We ran all the way down the hill and back to my car, and fearing we were being chased, we didn't stick around. I drove us all back to James's house, where we just sat in the car for a good half hour talking, wondering what exactly just happened. Sean is very religious and superstitious as well. He was confident we had reached a spirit of some kind. I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I believe there was someone else in the church with us, which I find to be equally terrifying. Sean went back to the church the next day with James to get his Ouija board back. And to make things even stranger, the Ouija board was missing, but the candles were still in place. When they saw it was missing from the entrance, they decided to just leave right away. This remains to be the single scariest experience of my life. This happened in Warren County, Georgia, a very rural inland part of the state. I was with my girlfriend Marissa, and we were driving around checking out the area, seeing if it was somewhere we'd like to live. It was very quiet and spacious, which is what we wanted. We're both Roman Catholic. She likes to go to church a little more than I do, though. It was a weekday in the middle of the day and not much traffic at all. We checked out a bunch of things in the area that would be important to see before deciding on moving to an area. Since Marissa has been an equestrian for most of her life, a big point of us moving to a rural area was for her to have a barn for her horses. After checking out some properties listed for sale, we happened to pass by a small, cute-looking church on the side of this very quiet road with a bunch of cars in the parking lot. This church wasn't far from the last property we just looked at, so Marissa shook my shoulder and said we should see if a mass was going on, see if it's nice. And so I pulled into the little dirt-like parking lot for the building and parked next to some old red minivan. A lot of the cars in the parking lot were on the older side. In fact, I'd say most of them. I mentioned that to Marissa as we got out of the car, and she agreed and said it was probably because it was a lower income area. I opened the door to the church for us and we stepped in, and it was a pretty small inside as we expected. I'd say there were 5 rows of pews, each cut in half in the middle by the nave, or center aisle. There had to be at least 20 people in there, though they were not an older crowd. Usually in every mass, big or small, you'd see a decent amount of seniors, but based on the backs of everyone's heads in there, everyone appeared to be in their 30s to 40s. It seemed everyone was sitting in silence for some kind of prayer. As we sat down in the back, the people closest to us started looking at us, like one at a time, and as others noticed the staring, they would look to see what the others were staring at and then look at us. Marissa and I looked at each other, then nervously looked back at everyone. All we could think to do was smile, but no one smiled back. They were giving us the most unwelcoming stares, and I just realized none of these people were dressed even remotely nicely for a mass. What was going on here? This was when I realized there were no women in here, Not a single one besides Marissa. And the stairs, they seemed to be staring more at Marissa than me. A man in a mask at the front of this alleged church, by what I guess was supposed to be the altar, then stepped up and pointed at us and said, "Who invited you here?" I took it upon myself to answer for us, and said that we were just passing by and saw that a mass was going on and we wanted to join. The man was clearly not a priest, and this was clearly not a Roman Catholic church. The masked man said, "You need to leave now." By now, every last person in the church was looking at us. I said, "Come on, honey," and we got up and hurried out and ran to the car. We wasted no time sitting in the car. I got us out of that parking lot right away, but we both noticed in the rearview mirror someone from the building getting in their van in the parking lot. I felt like there was no way they were going to follow us until we saw that gray van catching up to us in the mirror. I had Marissa GPS the Warren County Sheriff's Office, and we drove straight there. The van was behind us the whole time, not on our ass, but close enough that it was obvious. The second we pulled into the public safety parking lot, the van kept driving down the road. When it was gone, we simply drove straight home and never looked at Warren County again. We clearly ended up in some kind of cult meeting, but I don't get why they had someone follow us, nor why they were having their meeting in broad daylight, or why they didn't at least lock the door. When I was a Cub Scout, we would always have our meetings somewhere in a Catholic elementary school, whether it was in the school gym or in one of the adjacent rooms. I was like 8 years old when this happened, and it was disturbing. But before I get into why I'm telling you that, let me start from the beginning. It started a few days earlier when I was at Mass with my mom and my brother like we'd go to every other week. We usually would be late, so we'd either sit in the back or stand by the doors if there were no seats. Today, we sat all the way in the back corner. My mom and then brother entered the pew first. I sat on the end. At some point during the Mass, I noticed an older man with glasses and a white mustache who was standing against the wall to the left of me looking at me. As I glanced over, he smiled, and I still remember vividly the stupid, creepy face that he made as he was trying to be funny. But I was 8, I wasn't a toddler. It felt weird and uncomfortable. I did my best to look away, but I could see him keep looking over to me every few seconds. I looked back at him, and once again he made another weird face that I assume he was making to try and be funny. It just came off as weird again. My mom noticed it this time and tapped me on the shoulder and whispered to ignore him. I believe she gave him a dirty look as well. The next time I looked in that direction, the man wasn't there anymore. He had walked somewhere else. The next thing I remember from that Mass was going up for communion, and then as I got back to my seat, the man was back in that spot again, and he was staring at me, just smiling the whole time until I got back to my seat. My mom noticed it again, and since we got the communion, we just left. My mom said on the way out she didn't like the way that guy was looking at us, specifically me. Now fast forward to when scouts come into play. Towards the end of our meetings, we'd sometimes have little fun contests or games, and this day in question we were having a scavenger hunt. The items we were supposed to be finding all tied into the theme of scouting. I remember some of the objects on the list being a first aid kit, a rope, a flashlight, things of that nature. We were split into 2 teams, and we all had a copy of the list, and the team to find the most items would win. So we all split up. The play area ranged from the gym to the cafeteria to some of the adjacent rooms. I was running around rooms and tiny hallways I'd never even seen before, looking for any of the items I could find on the list. I wasn't having much luck. Eventually, I found myself in this very narrow hallway in the back section of the cafeteria by the kitchen. In this hallway was one of those ice cream fridges filled with like ice pops. I looked inside the fridge for any of the items, nothing. But then I decided to be sneaky and take one of the ice cream pops. As I did, I heard a man's voice to the right of me. I looked over and saw that man from the church a few days earlier, walking over to me smiling. He said something like, "Don't let them see you taking that." He shut the fridge door and grabbed my hand and told me he had some better treats in the back where the kids aren't allowed. I broke my hand free from his grip and tried to walk away scared, and he grabbed my wrist this time tightly. I turned to him and he went, "Shh, calm down." I yelled help, and he let go of me and said, "Stop it." I ran back to the gym and told the Cub Master what happened. Thankfully, my Cub Master was an actually nice, caring man, probably because he was a father himself, and he told my mom about it. I told my mom it was that same man from the church, and my Cub Master would help my mom in reporting that man to the church. It turned out that that man worked for the church. I'm not sure what exactly he did, but he lived on the church grounds, which explained why he was there. What makes me sick, though, is that allegations came out against that man from an altar boy's parents, claiming he touched him inappropriately. The disgusting thing is, I can imagine what he was planning on attempting to do if I actually followed him to wherever he was trying to take me. I don't know if that man went to prison or what, but I know the church cut ties with him after this. It was about 4 in the morning one Saturday, and I was driving to work down the interstate. I was in the middle lane moving pretty quickly because I was already running a bit late to work that morning. So when I noticed a car in my left mirror catching me pretty quickly, I was almost alarmed. I had to already be going like 75 to 80, so he had to be going anywhere from 90 to 100. The car quickly caught up to me. It was a gray Honda Accord coupe. I took a look into the car, curious to see who was behind the wheel. Even though it was still dark out, I could see the driver looking back at me as he passed. Then I noticed someone in the back seat too. It was a young woman who appeared to be banging on the back window. Initially I didn't understand. I assumed it was a girl messing with me or whatever. It's usually not a person's first instinct to assume something sinister is going on, but when I saw the driver apparently push her down under the window and the car swerve at the same time, then I knew something was wrong. That woman was trying to get someone's attention and call for help. I started to speed up a little bit and got behind them so I could keep up. I could see the driver continuously reach into the back of the car with a swinging motion. He looked to be hitting her. I could see her arms flailing in the back of the car. I was in complete shock. I was actually witnessing a kidnapping right in front of me. As I was behind them, matching their speed of about 95 miles per hour, I took out my phone and called 911. As I was on the phone, the car in front of me's brake lights lit up and he started to slow down to a gradual stop. He definitely noticed that I saw what was going on and thought that I was following him. As much as I wanted to save that woman's life, I didn't know if the driver was armed with a gun or not, so I pulled around him and floored it. I wanted to keep behind them though, so I pulled off the next exit, but didn't go entirely up the exit ramp. I waited for the car to pass by down the highway, then I drove over the grass and back onto the highway and began to floor it to catch up to the car, all while still talking to 911, telling them where we were, what kind of car they were in, and how fast we were going. I was easily going 90 again to catch up to them. As I caught up to the car again, going at insane speed, he noticed me again even before I got too close. He started to brake in front of me again. I tried to go around him, but he cut me off. I had to stop. He got out from his car and started running towards my car with something in his hand. And in a panic, I threw the car in reverse until he stopped chasing me. Then I put it back in drive before he could get back in his car, and I drove quickly past him. The 911 operator told me there was a state trooper not far ahead from our location, and to just keep driving until I passed him. The man in the car behind me continued to follow me, both of us still going at an insane 90 miles per hour plus. I felt the weight of 1,000,000 pounds released off my shoulders when the flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rearview mirror behind the car chasing me. With me in front of him and the cop behind him, he didn't have much maneuverability, and he quickly pulled over onto the grass. I pulled over in front of him, but with at least 2 cars worth of space between us, because I still didn't know how this was about to go down. Luckily, the cop with his gun drawn got the guy out of the car with his hands up. By then, I got out and watched the whole thing. He was on the ground in cuffs now, laying on his stomach. Another police car showed up, and another cop entered the scene. The woman in the back of the car was let out. She was badly beaten, in tears, and extremely ecstatic to be saved, as she kept praising me for saving her life. The driver of the car was her ex-boyfriend, who had come to her house, and when she refused to talk to him, he attacked her, grabbed her, and threw her in the back of his car, which had the child locks on. It's scary to think where he might have been taking her, or what he was planning to do to her, if I or anybody else didn't witness her screaming for help in the back of the car. I made a trip to visit Boston to support a family member who was running the Boston Marathon. I was driving from Chicago to Massachusetts and had to take Route 20, possibly the longest highway in the United States. I don't much like flying, so I decided to start driving around 3 p.m. after work. My GPS was telling me it would be a 15-hour drive, so knowing how I drove, it would probably be 14 hours. My ETA was telling me 6 a.m. I was expecting 5 a.m. if I didn't stop. I'm the type who doesn't like to make many stops on long car rides. I like to just bang out the whole ride in one go. Most of Route 20 is open land, and there isn't a whole lot of traffic in a lot of it. I'd say 10 hours in, around 1 a.m., I was basically one of the only cars on the highway. I had music blasting to keep me awake. I was comparatively almost done. Not really, but I was optimistic. I was starting to get slightly tired though, even after the 2 cups of coffee I drank. I didn't want to pull off for more coffee though, so I tanked through it. It would make finally collapsing into a bed when I'd get there all the more rewarding. One moment I was the only car in sight, then next thing I knew, there were headlights in my rearview mirror. I was in the left lane and he was kind of on my ass, so I switched to the right lane. He sped up a bit, passed by me, then for some reason slowed to match my speed just as my front bumper aligned with his rear bumper. Then he just matched my speed for the longest time. I started to speed up to pass him. As soon as I got in front of him, he turned into my lane behind me, so close it almost looked like he was going to clip my car. I had no choice but to speed up even more to get him off my ass. I wasn't looking to be the victim of a road rage incident, not at this hour especially. As I sped up, so did he. I switched into the left lane, and so did he. Now I knew something was wrong. It couldn't be an unmarked cop, it was some old ratty pickup truck. The truck started to flash its lights behind me. I didn't slow down. I was honestly afraid, because I had never experienced anything on the road like this. I kept driving, stepping on the gas just a bit to increase my speed 5 to 10 miles per hour, hoping to pass a cop or any other cars for that matter. But I couldn't see another set of taillights as far as the eye could see. Just the very seldom cars zooming past on the other side of the highway. The pickup truck behind me then switched lanes and floored it. I heard the aggressive roar of his truck's engine passing me. He cut in front of me, then he started to brake. I tried to swerve around him, but he kept blocking me. I was forced to stomp on the brakes too. I started to honk because it's all I could do. As we slowed, the man in front of me put on his hazards and started waving his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull to the side of the road. I obviously didn't listen. I took the chance to quickly pull around him as he started pulling onto the grass, and then I floored it. My sedan could easily escape his pickup truck, but I hit 100 and he was still not far behind me. I got off the highway at the first exit. I stopped at the red light at the end of the exit ramp, not expecting him to still be behind me, but they were. The pickup truck's headlights pulled up behind me, then the truck pulled up to the red light next to me. I looked to my left at the truck, and the window rolled down. Inside were 3 people, I'd assume men, wearing vendetta masks. They all looked at me, trying to scare me, I'm sure. But it worked. I blew the red light onto the main road, and finally there were at least other cars around. The pickup truck finally stopped following me. At a certain point, I was scared I was going to be killed. It was more than just a road rage incident. I didn't get the plate number. In fact, I don't even remember seeing a plate on that truck. All I know is it was some 90s black pickup truck. After that, I parked in a Walmart parking lot and fell asleep. I woke up around 8 and finished the drive. I told my family about the incident, and I warn everybody to be careful when driving late at night. It was a Tuesday night in March. I was driving back from a friend's house in the city, a trek that would take me about an hour in decent weather, but a deep fog had set in on the long, lonely highway. After midnight, this particular stretch of road was often abandoned, save for the odd semi, their plates showing unfamiliar lettering and colors from places I'd never been to. It was 1 a.m. It had been a long day, wandering around for hours with my friend, shopping, checking out new cafes. It had left me tired. My eyelids were heavy, and the impenetrable fog made the highway an unending, drifting mess of hypnotizing gray. I drove cautiously, at times slowing my speed to a steady crawl and flashing my hazard lights to let anyone behind me know I was there. Suddenly, a vehicle appeared, its wheels half on the highway and half on the shoulder. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over behind it, narrowly passing by the bumper. My heart was beating heavily after the near miss, so I put my car into park to catch my breath behind the black sedan. I watched as the car began slowly rolling forward off the road, so it was fully parked on the shoulder. The car sat for a moment, then the driver's side window rolled down. An arm appeared and did a waving motion to pull over. At this point, the adrenaline from the sudden stop was still pumping through my body, and it made sense to move further off the road. I followed the car as it took a slight turn onto a side road. It came to a stop and the driver's side door opened. The driver walked towards me through the fog, a tall, lean guy wearing a black winter jacket and jeans. He looked younger, 30-ish, and he was smiling as he approached my car, illuminated by my headlights. I rolled down my window a crack, thinking maybe he was coming up to apologize for his unsafe parking. He got to my window and then motioned for me to roll it down further. I shook my head no, feeling uneasy, and told him I would be able to hear him. He asked where I was heading, and I said home. He said the fog wasn't supposed to let up anytime soon and that it wasn't safe to drive in. I let him know I was okay with it. He raised his eyebrows and asked why I pulled over then. I didn't want to start anything with this man, so I lied and said I had gotten a phone call and needed to pull over to answer it. He smirked, and it felt like he could tell I was lying. He said he lived with his wife and son just down the road, about 5 minutes, if I wanted to wait it out. I shook my head again, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. He tried to scare me, saying how it's 10 times more likely for me to die in a car crash when it's foggy, and that I looked tired and I should really think of my family before getting back on the road. I held my ground. He was getting angry. He began looking back at his car, and I saw someone move in the passenger seat I hadn't seen before. Suddenly the man was grabbing at my door handle, trying to open it. Thankfully it was locked. The passenger door to the car opened, and another man came running towards me with a baseball bat. I put my car in reverse, and the driver yelled something at him as I hit the gas. He took a swing at my car but missed. Luckily I hadn't pulled too far off the highway, but it was hard to tell where this road ended and the highway began as I backed up in the heavy fog. I turned my wheels and put my car into drive, praying there was no traffic coming up behind me. I floored it as I haphazardly merged onto the highway, not looking back. I often wonder when I'm driving that stretch of road if they tried to stop anyone else that night, and what would have happened to me had I rolled my window down further. Scary things can happen on the road at night. Nighttime is when the creeps and weirdos come out, so you have to be extra careful. This was in 2020, right around when COVID started. I would often work overnight shifts at a hospital. My hours would be all over the place. I would always take the same route home, a parkway that I take 10 miles north to my town. It's never a busy parkway, even during the daytime, so at night, I'm almost always completely alone on the road, and COVID just made it even more of a ghost town. I never even see any state police at night either. Usually this is convenient for me as I get home quicker without any slow drivers around me. It was one night I was driving home in the middle of the night, or rather early hours of the morning. I see a red flashing SOS light stand perched up on the side of the road. As it's shown, it would light up the taillights of the car parked on the side of the road. Clearly someone was in need of assistance, and I was, I guess, in a good mood that night, so I pulled over in front of the car. As I passed the car, I saw a man waving his arms in the air. I put my hazards on and stepped out of my car to approach the man. Based on his skin tone and slight accent, he was a Hispanic man. Due to the COVID mask he was wearing, though, I couldn't gauge how old he was, but if I had to guess, I'd say late 20s, early 30s. I asked him what the problem was. He said his battery died after he stayed pulled over for too long. I asked him if he had jumper cables, because I did not. He said no. I didn't really know how else I could be of assistance other than offering him a ride, but then he asked if he could borrow my cell phone. He said his phone died too. I wasn't eager to hand this stranger on the side of the road my phone, but I did. I unlocked it for him and opened the phone app. He proceeded to call someone, then slowly walked away as he started to talk into the phone. His car door was open though, so I kind of decided to just take it upon myself to sit in the front seat and try turning the car on myself. And sure enough, the keys were in the ignition still. I turned the key one click to the right, and to my surprise, the battery turned on. I tried turning the hazards on, they worked. I turned the radio on, and it worked. So I then turned the key once more to the right to start the car now, and it started on the first try. I didn't have enough time to think about how I might have just walked into a trap, because as soon as the car turned on, I felt 2 arms wrap around my throat trying to choke me. I heard a voice yelling from outside, "Hey, hey," over and over. It was the guy with my phone. I broke out of the person in the back seat's grip pretty easily, I looked at him, and it was a young teenage kid in the back seat. The man with my phone was running back towards his car, screaming at me. I picked flight over fight and ran back to my car and got out of there as soon as the car was on. And I swear to God, I heard a loud pop from outside that I found out moments later was a gunshot. My rear windshield had a hole in it, along with multiple cracks surrounding the hole. I couldn't call police until I got home since that guy still had my phone. I got home and told my parents, then went ahead and called 911 using the house phone. I explained to the police that I was led into a trap, that someone was hiding in the back seat, and that the man who shot at my car still had my phone, which was still unlocked with all my personal information on it. The police recommended I call AT&T immediately and asked them to track the last call that was made within the hour, but AT&T customer service didn't open until 7 a.m., so I had to wait. With the cops still there though, I used Find My iPhone on my dad's phone to lock my phone, which I hoped was before they could have found our home address on there. Come 7 a.m., I called AT&T to ask if they could track the last call made, but there were no calls logged since my phone call with my mom earlier the previous day at work. That meant the man never actually made a phone call to anyone, and I found out some more horrible news. All the Bitcoin I was holding in my Coinbase account was gone, many thousands of dollars worth of it, sent to some random Bitcoin wallet address, completely untrackable. The phone's location stopped updating once the thief either disposed of or turned off the phone. I never got it back. A week after this incident, I woke up to my mom's concerned voice. My dad knocked on my door and told me to come downstairs and outside. I was scared, but I followed him. He said he and my mom heard someone in our backyard, but when we checked, we didn't see anyone there. My mom wanted to call the cops, but my dad said we'd hold off until we heard another noise, which we never did. I don't know if what they heard was a person, but if it was, I really hope it wasn't that man who had my phone. My address was saved everywhere on that phone. Regardless, it's been 2 years now, so it's obviously over. Still, I will never stop to help somebody on a highway at night ever again. I was driving home from work one night, taking my usual route home. I got out at midnight, so it was probably 12:15ish at this point. My town is pretty quiet and boring. A lot of woods everywhere, and not a lot of people or houses. I was on this road not far from my house with a cornfield on one side and a patch of woods on the other. It was midsummer and like 75 degrees, so I had my convertible top down. I was cruising down the street going like 50 when I heard a loud, blood-curdling woman's scream come from one side of the road, but I couldn't tell which one. I brought the car to a quick halt by slamming on the brakes and listening. There was a woman's cry from the left side, in the woods. She was crying for help. I got out of my car and grabbed the baton from my back seat. I walked towards the woods and called back, "Who's out there?" and the woman immediately called back, "Please help me." I began to run into the woods, swiping all the twigs and bushes out of my way. I yelled out to the woman to keep screaming so I could find her. She'd every 10 seconds or so scream help, and I'd approach in that direction, running, screaming back. But pretty soon, I started to realize no matter how far into the woods I went, the woman's yells didn't seem to get any closer or louder. If anything, they were always the same distance, even though I was booking it straight in the direction of the screams. I screamed out, "Tell me where you are," and about 5 seconds later, the woman once again screamed out, "Help." I stopped in my tracks now. I didn't like this. I started to feel like I was walking into some kind of trap. I turned around and started running back in the direction I came. I ran and ran until I could see the flashing headlights of my car on the side of the road beyond the trees. The whole way back, I still heard the woman's screams, but they were still the same distance no matter how much closer to my car I got, as if she were following me back. Was I being stalked? I got in my car and just drove out of there, completely freaked out. I called 911 to report it to the authorities in case they'd want to investigate it. I wasn't sticking around there though, I was tired. After telling a few friends and family about the strange encounter, I was ready to move on with my life. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made me sick to my stomach. The dead body of a 30-something-year-old woman was found in the woods by a man hiking with his dog. Oddly, there were no signs of foul play. The location that the body was reported to have been found was the same general area where I heard the screams. While that patch of woods is very big, I can't help but feel that would be a huge coincidence. I was driving from Brooklyn to Vermont to my friend John's cabin to have a weekend of snowboarding. I had 2 cars at the time of this story, a 2013 BMW 3 Series and a 2006 Ford F-150, which I was driving on this particular night. I had my snowboarding gear in the bed of the truck. I was about 45 minutes from my buddy's cabin at this point. It was late, like 10 p.m. It was pitch black on these roads and it was snowing. There were like no other cars on the road up there besides me at that hour. I had just gotten my truck back from the mechanic a few weeks ago. I frequently had problems with that truck, and that night was no exception. At perhaps the worst possible time, on the quietest, darkest road, suddenly my engine starts to completely overheat into the red zone. I slow down and pull onto the side, and I wait for it to cool down again. Then I slowly got back on the road. But even at a slow speed, the needle went back up to the red, and the engine was overheating again. I had to pull over and turn off the truck. I went under the hood to try and diagnose the problem, but I couldn't in the dark and the snow. I had to call John. On this road, the reception for T-Mobile was non-existent. I couldn't even call for help. In the moment, I felt screwed. I went into the truck to turn it on again, and at least wait in the heat of the truck as it idled. It didn't seem to overheat while idling. I tried one more time to drive, but the same thing happened again. So I had to wait like 10 minutes before I saw a car passing. I had my hazards on, and I opened the door and waved my arms. The passing car stopped. It was some little Toyota. The guy rolled his window down, and I thanked him for stopping and asked if I could use his phone. He asked what happened. I told him my truck was overheating and was undrivable. He then asked me if I'm all alone. I paused for a second and said, "Yeah?" He reached for his cell phone and handed it to me. He must have been a local because he had bars. I called my friend John, he picked up, and I asked him what I should do. He told me to call this specific towing company nearby and that he'd come and pick me up. I gave him my exact location and he said he was gonna head over. After that, I called the towing company he gave me and requested assistance. During both phone calls, the guy in his car watched me the whole time. I tried to not look back though. After my phone calls, I handed the man back his phone and thanked him. He said you're welcome, and without saying anything else, he rolled up his window and drove down the snowy road into the darkness ahead. I watched as his taillights disappeared completely as he descended below the top of the hilly road above. I was once again alone. I got back into my idling truck to be in the warmth. I flicked the headlights off for a second just to get an idea of how dark it was out. And when I say I couldn't see an inch outside the windows, I'm not exaggerating. It was pure blackness. I sat in the truck waiting and waiting. I couldn't even do anything that needed an internet connection. I resorted to playing games on my phone for 20 minutes, until there was a bang at my passenger side window. I jumped out of my skin as I looked to the window. I couldn't see much of the person, it was too dark outside, and the headlights didn't really light up the sides of the truck. I heard a man's voice start begging for help. He was yelling at me to open the door, he was freezing. I heard him trying to open the door himself, but it was locked. I shined my flashlight to the window, but it barely helped in seeing who was out there. All I saw was someone in a really big black coat with the hood over his head. I yelled back, "What's wrong?" And the mysterious man outside replied saying he's lost and stranded and needs to get out of the cold. I didn't trust this. I sat there nervously trying to figure out what to ask him to prove he's not someone looking to harm me. I didn't even figure out what to say before he started aggressively trying to still open the locked door, and then started pounding on the glass even harder, still screaming for help. In the heat of the moment, I decided to listen to my gut. I put the truck in drive, and he realized this and started pounding harder on the window to break it. I drove the truck onto the road and brought it up to 30 miles per hour, despite the damage I was surely doing to the overheating engine. But then I saw something that I didn't expect that made me feel like my heart skipped a beat. As I came over the hill in the road, I noticed the reflection of taillights approaching me on the side of the road. As I passed the parked car, I realized it was that same Toyota from earlier, the one that the man was driving. I slowed down and lowered the window to see if the man was in the car, but I didn't see anything. It It seemed like the car was empty. I looked out the window for a second behind the car, and my taillights lit up footprints in the snow, meaning that man who was banging on my window was him, and he was trying to trick me into opening the door to do who knows what. I kept driving my truck, knowing full well I was fucking up the engine, but I didn't care at that point. I pulled over a few minutes later when I saw headlights approaching on the other side, and I wanted to cheer in excitement when I realized it was the tow truck. I flashed my lights and he pulled to the side. As the driver came out, I told him about what just happened. He joked that he got there at the right time. Then he asked if the guy had a gun or anything on him, but I told him I couldn't see. He replied, "Well, then we better do this quick." It took him about 15 minutes to get the truck attached, and in that time, the Toyota never passed us. It was possible he turned around and went the other way for this exact reason. I used the tow truck driver's phone to call John again and tell him to just meet us at the body shop. To summarize the rest, John and I still went snowboarding that weekend, and the body shop replaced the broken water pump in my truck, causing the overheating. I sold that truck a few weeks later. I'm glad I didn't lower my window or unlock the doors to that man trying to get into my car. In that setting, I could have been murdered, and no one would have ever known who had done it. I had my first girlfriend at 17. I lived with my mom at the time because my parents got a divorce when I was 11. One day, I asked my girlfriend on a date, and she was down. We both had jobs. I worked at a local grocery store and she worked at a Starbucks. We both worked the day shifts, and we were also in our senior year of high school. The reason why I asked her on a date that day was because it was a Friday, and we barely had any homework. After work, I picked up my girlfriend from her house, and we went to a small restaurant 10 minutes away from my house, because that's all I could afford at the time. We ate, then we went back to her house to spend some time together. By then, it was dark. She complained how our date night was short, and I told her I can't take her anywhere else that had to be paid for. We came to an agreement that we would go on a night drive. We drove in town, then we drove on some empty road in the woods. Eventually the pavement ended and we were on a dirt road. I had to pee really bad. I told my girlfriend, and she had to pee as well. We pulled over and got out of my car. For some reason, right when we got out of the car, we smelt an awful, indescribable smell. I excused it as another person who also pulled over to do their business. My girlfriend actually gagged from the smell. I told her that we would pee real quick, then go back in the car to get back into town. There was a little flat area that was the best place to piss at. We did our thing, and then we were on our way back to my car. But on our way back, we heard a noise come from the left side of us. It sounded like a twig snapping. I was afraid it was an animal, so we rushed back to my car. Before I had time to open my car door, I heard a scream of fear or pain in the direction my girlfriend and I just pissed at. I told my girlfriend to get in my car while I go investigate. She begged me not to, but I did it anyway. To make her feel safer, I locked the doors. I went the direction to where we were, and I heard that scream again. For some reason, I lost all of my courage to investigate now that I heard it much closer. But when I heard it, it sounded like from the same direction that my girlfriend and I heard the twig snapping. Instead of going that way, I went on my phone, turned the flash on, then took a picture. Once the flash went off, I saw a man in a white shirt with black stripes, with some blue tarp right in front of him. He was just standing there. I didn't hesitate to dash to the car. I unlocked the doors, got in my car, put it in drive, and floored it. My girlfriend kept asking me what happened. She saw I was scared. I told her I would explain later. We got back at the shadier side of town, then drove back to my girlfriend's house. We entered the house and went into her room. That's when I told her I saw the man with a blue tarp in front of him, just standing there. I showed her the picture, and she was just as creeped out as I was. She let me spend the night because we were creeped out, and it was a Friday, and we also had no work or school the next day. That was by far the scariest moment of my life. We aren't in a relationship anymore. I'm 23, she's 22, but we remain as best friends. It was late summer of 2011. I was almost 19 and was hanging out with my best friend who was a few years younger than me. We live in a very rural area of southwestern Virginia, about 15 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina. Around here, pretty much everything closes by 10 p.m., so you have to find your own ways to pass the time. But that was never a problem for us, as we could always find a way to have fun. The night started out harmless enough. First to the mall, then cruising the streets looking for girls, things any teen guys would be up to. When that proved to be unsuccessful, we just decided to go bowling until they closed. We then went to Main Street a little before midnight, just to walk some of the back alleys, acting like the edgy badasses we thought we were. But we never felt like we were in any danger, as there isn't much violent crime in the area. After we'd walked all the streets, we got bored with this and decided to grab a bite from Waffle House, as this was pretty much the only late-night dining option at the time. After we ate and made a quick stop at Walmart, we still weren't ready to go home, so we set out driving around some of the backcountry roads. This was nothing new to us. As I said, around here you have to make your own fun, and late-night drives were always our thing. The stretch of road we were now on, I had only driven maybe once before during the day, though it wasn't far from where either of us lived. We just had no reason of going down it. While still in Carolina, the road is paved, but within a mile, it enters back into Virginia and turns into dirt. Like most of the dirt roads around here, the county doesn't really give this one much attention since it's so far out of the way, and there are very few houses on it. Since the road often washes out in the heavy rains, you have to drive much slower, and being as unfamiliar with it as we were now traveling at a crawl. While we were both more cautious now, it still just seemed as any other road we would drive. Now at this time of night, the roads are essentially empty around here, and with only a handful of houses on this road, we were certain we wouldn't run into any other traffic. The road is mainly all wooded and sits at the bottom of a small mountain. At night, it's easy to overlook any of the houses on it. We probably would have missed them all, if not for out of the corner of our eye, we noticed a light burning. We both looked and noticed a man standing under his porch light. We couldn't make out any features of the man, but we could tell he was watching us, standing completely motionless, with the exception of his head following us. While we were both now on edge, we tried not to think much of it. We figured it was just someone stepping out for a cigarette, but it's just his demeanor that was so uncomforting to us. While nothing came from that man watching us, this was only the beginning. We gradually picked up our speed as we were becoming a little more unnerved the more we talked about it. Within just a few minutes, though, we came to the end of the road, and we were back on the hardtop, a road that I was much more familiar with, and that I drove about once a week. We turned right, and we were feeling much better as we could pick up our speed and leave the thoughts of that man behind us. We enjoyed the sights from this road as it travels atop a small mountain ridge, offering beautiful views of the town below. After a couple miles, we had reached the end of this road and made another right to make our way back to my house. This road is a little more wooded than the one we had just turned from, but I was even more familiar with this road, as I drove or ridden it literally thousands of times before. As we're making our way back toward the main highway, we saw something up ahead in the distant reaches of my headlights. Deer are horrendous around here, so we figured that's all it was and slowed down. We began to notice it was much whiter than the brown fur of a deer, but we're both used to seeing the occasional albino, so still assumed that's all it was. As we got closer, we noticed it was no animal at all. It was definitely a human, but hunched over with their back to us. They were walking in the left lane against traffic, as one is supposed to. I looked back at my friend as he asked, "What the hell are they doing walking at this time of night?" I looked back towards the person and could finally make out the shape of an older-looking woman with long, scraggly gray hair, wearing a white t-shirt and white pants. She still had her back turned to us until we were about 50 feet away from her. That's when she turned to us, and we got the first look at her face. I don't want to say she was on meth or other drugs, but that's the look she gave off. Deep eye sockets with heavy dark bags under them, greasy hair, and very aged skin. I'm not sure how old she actually was, but if I had to guess, I'd say mid-40s to late 50s. But that wasn't the worst of it. She put her hands in the air and started waving them frantically and running towards us. When she did, we could see what looked like dried blood all over the front of her shirt and pants, as well as what looked like a big knife in one of her hands. We weren't sure what she wanted, but that desire to be edgy badasses was instantly erased. We floored it and didn't let off until we reached the highway. We were so terrified of the entire ordeal that what would have usually been a 5-minute quick drive to my house became a 35-minute detour, just on the absurd thought that she could somehow follow us there. In small communities like this, you know pretty much everyone, but neither of us had ever seen this woman before, nor did we ever again. We kept a watch on local news for any stories about a bloody woman being picked up, but never heard a thing. I can't even begin to come up with an explanation why she would be walking the backcountry roads at almost 4 in the morning in her shape and condition, with blood on her clothes and a knife in her hand, with all the risks of human or animal altercation she faced. Fast forward to present day. I now live with my wife on that peaceful road on the mountain ridge, between the two roads of the incident. I take the latter one on an almost daily basis, and still have seen no sign of that strange woman since. But just earlier this year, there was a huge drug and cockfighting ring busted down the road of the watching man. I don't know if it was the same house, or if these people were even living in the area back then, but after all this happened, I've often wondered if that was the same house, and maybe that guy was keeping guard on the place. As for the woman, I just hope I never run into her again.